All right, welcome to Making the Argument. We're doing a special live episode today where we're going to discuss that obviously somebody tried to assassinate the president, and we're not going to use his name, but we are going to discuss a little bit about what we know of this individual. But one of the biggest things that we are going to go over today is how this possibly could have happened. Because there are a lot of problems with what we're seeing right now from the security situation on the ground. We also need to have discussions about what sort of rhetoric might have actually led to this. We also need to talk about how does this impact the election going forward? How does it impact security for the Trump campaign going forward? What has it meant? What has the response been? And I think we also have to ask the question, is this something where all the people coming out and condemning political violence, is it genuine? Is it genuine? Or are there some serious and honest questions that we need to ask about that as well? So what we're going to discuss today is essentially the who, what, where, when, how, why of how this went down. Now, let me go ahead and go into the introductions here, especially for those of us that have never, or for those of you who have never watched this channel before. So I'm obviously in politics, but my background was military. So I was Army Special Forces, kind of better known as Green Berets. I was a SF weapons sergeant, SF intel sergeant, did a couple tours over in Iraq, did some tours in other places as well, training and things of that nature. I also have a Bravo 4 identifier. And what that means is I went to the United States Army Sniper School. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that being a sniper was my primary role in the military. It wasn't, but it was one of the functions that I did play and that I was qualified for. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how would you maintain security at a site like this? What would be some of the things that you would look for? What would be some of the things that you would do? And I just want you to know that I do have some expertise in this. Don't claim to be the ultimate subject matter expert, but I have enough expertise to spot things, especially those things that are obviously wrong. And so we're going to discuss a little bit about that in depth as well. As always, I am your host, Nick Freitas. With me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
I might not be Queen of the Bees for much longer. We wanted to go live yesterday, but we couldn't because Nick landed himself in the ICU because he decided to squish a hornet and went into anaphylactic shock, and now he gets to carry an EpiPen around him forever. So I might be getting rid of the bees.
You know what? I'm here and the hornet's dead. So who wins?
You should see the other guy.
I did. All right. And then, of course, our resident historian and political prognosticator, Christian Hines.
So what I'm hearing is there were 2 miracles that have taken place over the last 3 days. Nick, I got one more thing for you. Something came in the mail yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Let's open it up and see what it is.
Oh gosh, now I'm a little. We're doing this live, huh?
An unboxing? Do we know?
Oh wait,
Ah!
that's what it is.
Christian has got his "Make America Great Again" hat, and again,
You
if
guys
you know
have
anything,
no idea what a big deal this is on Christian.
If you know anything about Christian, this is a statement right here. This is a statement, and I think this is something that we're actually seeing all over the country with a lot of people that were very, very skeptical of Donald Trump. I've even said that when he first ran in 2016, I was very skeptical. I was a Rand Paul guy. Still love Rand Paul. But with everything that has happened, there's been a lot of people who might have been skeptical, who have either been won over by the president's policies during his first term, or have been won over by the fact that witnessing everything that has been done to try to stop him is something that's only motivated a lot of us to now be a lot more enthusiastic of our support. But again, the main topic of the conversation today is going to be digging into what exactly happened and how this could have happened and how it's going to impact things going forward. But before that, we have got to give a shout out to the sponsor of this podcast. So we want to say thank you to Jeremy's Razors. For those of you who don't know, we actually teamed up with Jeremy's Razors when I had to shave my beard for my daughter's wedding. And if you haven't seen the commercial we did for that, it was a lot of fun. My oldest daughter, Lily, got to be involved in that. There was a lot of people asked that why didn't the groom have to shave his beard? Well, it's because Lily wanted me to wear my dress blues, and proper Army Regulation 670-1 says that you really are supposed to have your beard clean shaven or within Army regs. And since Tina wouldn't let me have a mustache, Jeremy's Razor stepped in and said, Nick, we'll help you out with this. We'll provide you a quality blade to shave that beard, because not just any blade is going to work on this, right? You use some blades and they just break automatically against the manliness of this particular beard. But Jeremy's Razors, because they're the only razors made exclusively from roundhouse kicks from Chuck Norris, were able to cut right through it like a hot knife through butter. And if you go on to jeremysrazors.com right now, use promo code Nick, you're going to get 15% off your order. One of the other things I love about this is that if you are the sort of man that also has a glorious, luxurious beard, and you're not going to use razors as much, right? We still got to use it up here. We still got to use it on the neck, right? We got to trim, right? We got to trim. But They also have a whole line of beard oil and other beard accoutrement to make sure that it does look as luxurious as it needs to be. Not to mention the fact that they've got all the other things that you're going to want. You got your deodorants, your body wash, your shampoos, all that good stuff, lacking a lot of the chemicals and other crap that gets put in, all the fillers that get put in other things that don't do any good and can potentially make your masculinity toxic. We wouldn't want that. We wouldn't want those fake chemicals in there. So go to jeremysrazors.com, use promo code Nick, get the 15% off your order, right? And again, when you do that, you not only help Jeremy's Razors, you help us as well. And we always appreciate people that have the courage to sponsor podcasts that are going to talk about difficult issues that oftentimes get demonetized. And so if you want to continue to support the show, Jeremy's Razors is a great way to do that. jeremysrazors.com, promo code Nick, 15% off. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this. So the first thing I kind of want to talk about here, and this is going to lead into something else. The first link I had for this, because we're going to talk about the timeline of the attempted assassination, and CNN had a timeline. And I looked at it and I said, you know what? I'm going to refuse to use CNN from now on out. And I've also publicly stated that as an elected official, obviously we get different reporters that will come and talk to us. I'm not talking to CNN ever again after some of the crap they pulled with this. I don't know if you saw the headline. I know I tweeted about it, where CNN initially put out a headline that said, Secret Service removes Trump from stage after he falls. After he falls during
and they
the
talked
event.
about loud noises.
And loud noises. So CNN has become a complete joke, and I'm not going to use their stuff. But we do have an assassination attempt timeline from Fox News. So if we can bring that up. And what we want to do is kind of give an idea of where things, we're at. Because if you weren't watching this, if you've ever been to a Trump rally, and I've been to one before down in Virginia Beach, I mean, you usually have a lot of people come up beforehand. There's a lot of other speakers. Trump is known for going off script, right? He'll have his teleprompter, and that pretty much goes out the window pretty quickly. And one of the things that people that have never been to a Trump rally before usually appreciate about it is that it does feel very authentic, that he's just talking to the crowd, and he is kind of going off of the energy of the crowd. And that happened here as well. He got up there and said, I think in less than 6 minutes into it, he's like, hey, I'm going to go off script here a little bit. And he asked to have a chart bring up and whatnot.
And he turned to read the chart. And typically he faces his audience.
Yeah.
Always faces the audience.
But he turned to read that chart. So July 13th, 6 p.m., Trump walks up to his podium at the Butler Farm Show and speaks to a crowd standing on all sides of him. So he had people behind, he had people to the sides, and he had people in front. A local law enforcement officer climbs onto the roof and sees I'm not even mentioning the guy's name, sees the assassin with a rifle. So understand, here's what's important, right? Right around 6 p.m., so Trump's up there, he's starting to speak. There had been numerous people that were sitting around saying, there's a guy up on the roof, there's a guy up on the roof, there was a police officer up front, they were trying to get his attention.
Someone earlier saw him with a rangefinder, but they thought maybe it was just it was police.
Yeah.
Local police saw him with a rangefinder, but thought, well, maybe it's binoculars so this guy could get a better look, and they never confronted him.
So he gets up there, and the police officer, when he sees him, he turns around and he points the gun at the police officer. The police officer ducks back down, and then he repositions, and then he starts shooting. So it's 6:11 p.m., less than 10 minutes after Trump begins speaking. Gunfire rings out from the direction of the person on the rooftop. The former president holds a hand up to his ear and then ducks for cover. Secret Service surround him on the stage. Some attendees think the shots are fireworks or firecrackers. It takes a minute for everyone to register that they need to get down, and one woman screams. So again, this is all within about 11 minutes. At 6:12, Secret Service agents can be overheard working to target the shooter using code names and firing off specific directions. The shooter is lying on a nearby rooftop about 160 yards from where Trump is speaking with an AR-15. Agents quickly shoot the assailant, killing him on the spot. Now, the next thing I want to point out here is we're going to take a look. So I actually pulled this up from the BBC because I looked at a lot of different pictures here, and I like the one they had. But this is a picture from the BBC link that shows where everything was located. And this is the part where we're going to talk about how could this have happened. And I'm going to try to do my best to be very even-handed and saying, okay, look, it's very easy in hindsight to look back and say, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? I'm going to try to I'm going to try to resist doing that as much as possible. And I'm just going to look at if I was walking onto this site and I was part of a site survey team, or I was part of a, protecting your principal and figuring out like, okay, where are the potential threat spots? What would I do in an area like this? So again, Christian, if you have that BBC link, bring that up and then just kind of scroll down to where this picture is right there. So here's the picture. And you can see you have the three barns, and then you have kind of where the benches are, where the spectator benches are, where Trump's stage is, and then in front of that was where a lot of the audience was like standing or sitting, et cetera. And then you see the picture of where the gunman's body was. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, as you kind of look at a site and you're looking for security, you're going to start off with where your principal is going to come in from, and the principal is the person that you're protecting, the primary focus of the security. Where they're going to be, where they're going to egress from, are they going to shake hands with the crowd, et cetera. And so for everyone that's going to be coming in, you obviously have security protocols that you play in order to try to, ensure that they don't have weapons or they don't have anything that they would potentially use. And so you have that set up somewhere so that the president can get close to his supporters, that the president can, again, shake hands and engage and whatnot. So that's one of your first things that you do. And you're going to maintain oversight on that, because you can't assume that, you've stopped everybody, or that you've prevented anybody that could potentially have, a weapon or some sort of ill intent. And it is important to remember that if somebody is determined enough to kill somebody, to the point where they're willing to lose their own life, it can be very difficult to stop that, right? We shouldn't make light of the fact that this is a very difficult thing to prevent under certain circumstances. So where they have like their sniper team set up, that makes perfect sense to me. Obviously, they got to the president very quickly when everyone became aware of what was going on. Here's what doesn't make sense to me, is that if you look at where the gunman shot from, and you look at those areas. If I'm looking at where Trump is going to be, obviously I'm going to have security teams at those three barns behind the stage. That's obvious. And they did. There's another structure that you see down here on the bottom right-hand side of the corner. That's obviously a place that you're going to have as well. You're going to want to have people within the wood line. But you're also thinking to yourself, anybody that would want to do damage with like small arms or explosives or something like that, they typically have to get close. So that's where you're kind of focused on, is the people that are going to have weapon systems that are going to try to sneak in, get close, and specifically target the president or target the principal. If you're looking at, once you get farther away, you start to focus more on where do you have a what we call like at least a ballistic loophole. And that means that you can see your target and you have a clear shot from wherever you're at to where the target's at, right? That's what you're going to start looking at. And the three main areas that provide elevation and that would provide you a clear shot of where Trump was actually going to be standing, right? Because he's surrounded by people all around, are going to be, potentially the three barns behind him. It's going to be this other structure down here in the bottom right of the picture. And then it's going to be those elevated structures, off to the left on the picture. Like that is one of the most obvious sites that you would go to that you would ensure was secure. And from what I can tell, the only thing that they had there was an officer that was standing on the ground toward the front of the building. And I'm sure they had some sort of patrol that they were possibly doing or whatnot. But I do not for the life of me understand why the Secret Service would not have somebody on that building. Now, from what I understand, Secret Service has come out and said, well, the reason why they didn't have someone there is because it was a sloped building and it wasn't good. It wasn't a good spot for a sniper. Okay, you had sniper teams on other buildings right behind.
Tell the amateur sniper that.
Well, wait a second. The sniper teams that you had set up were on sloped buildings.
Right.
Right. You operate within the environment that you have, not what's necessarily ideal. But here's what I'm saying. You don't need to have a sniper team up there if you don't think that that's the best place to have it. I could see someone coming to that conclusion. What I don't understand is not having someone up there. Because at that point, all you need to do is you have someone up there to prevent anybody else from getting up there. Why? Why would you not have someone? That is an easy thing to accomplish.
Even if they had patrols around the area, there were enough gaps in that patrol to where this guy can get a ladder, climb the building with gear. And he was even seen with a rangefinder beforehand. Mm-hmm. And everybody is highlighting it and telling police officers, hey, this guy's up there. He's bear crawling across the roof. And they did nothing. Well, and the question that has been asked here is that if you had something that could be seen as a credible threat, why wasn't the communication immediately going out? Gunman, something, anything. Why wasn't something going out?
The sniper teams are already, it appears that the sniper teams are already looking in that direction. But at this point, if you have someone sneaking up on a roof, if you've already had someone that you thought was engaging in suspicious behavior, if you've had numerous people telling you there's somebody on the roof with something, or there's somebody on the roof with a gun, why at that point are you not shutting things down, securing the situation before Trump continues to speak? And again, this is the part where is it incompetence or is it conspiracy? And people have a right to ask those questions, because I am looking at this and I honestly feel that anybody that's played one game of Call of Duty is going to look at this and know that's dangerous. You don't need to be Bravo 4 qualified. You don't need to have gone through, SODIC, which is it used to be, now it's SF Sniper School. It used to be the Special Operations Target Interdiction Course. You don't need to go through elaborate training through the Secret Service or principal security details. You don't need to go through any of that to recognize that's probably your primary threat with respect to a long-range attack, because everything else is going to be a little bit more difficult to secure. It's also probably the most obvious place someone would go if they're a crackpot with a rifle that wants to try to take a shot at the president. So why do you not have people up there? That doesn't make any sense to me. So it is either complete and total rank incompetence, or it's something more nefarious. And I don't know the answer. I'm not going to overly speculate on people being in on it. I just think it's horrible enough as it is. So that's the first thing I want people to understand, is that this is not something where somebody engaged in some sort of elaborate strategy where they planned this out for days on end and made sure that they were in a ghillie suit somewhere in the wood line where they could take a shot at the president. This is a 20-year-old guy that gets up on a roof with a gun and does so in a way that nobody spots him with the rifle, or at least no law enforcement, no perimeter security spots him with the rifle. Nobody perimeter security enforcement spots him when he's trying to climb up on a roof, right? And nobody's positioned in such a way to be able to prevent this from happening. There is zero excuse for this. And anybody that has listened to me talk about kind of security protocols will tell you that I tend to be somebody that says, look, it's easy to second guess. It's easy to second guess. There might have been 1,000 other factors going on. They might have had other things that they were concerned about. They might have had other people. And it might have been confusing. Maybe the information wasn't relayed to them correctly, and so they were looking in the wrong place, right? There's a lot of stuff that can happen, and when your adrenaline's going. I'm sorry, I don't buy it for this one. It's either rank incompetence.
It's either just gross incompetence. And everybody's kind of highlighting the DEI hires here. And I don't know how many memes you all have seen, but I've seen some pretty awesome memes.
Yeah.
Talking about the wage gap and DEI hires and things like that. But all joking and memes aside, this was either the biggest mess up that you could possibly have, or, and I feel like more likely, something is amiss here. There was someone helping this person. At least I tend to think that.
Well,
and I know that we try not to go conspiracy theorist, but it is hard not to on this situation.
Well, let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit too, because I want to highlight this. You'll see that they have if you scroll down to the next one, it says 130 meters. So to give you an idea, if you've got an AR-15, so in the military, we were issued M4s. The primary difference between an M4 and an AR-15 is an M4 either has a 3-round burst or a full auto section. But almost all of us, when we're actually operating, we're on semi-automatic, right? So you could fairly easily hit a human-sized target if you had a decent. You didn't even need a scope, right? I use an EOTech or a Halo sight. You could easily hit what they called an E-type silhouette, which was made to look like a person at 150 meters, right? So this is another part where I look at this going, how could you possibly not secure a site like that? Because that's well within range. It's not as if this guy was backed off, trying to take a shot with a Barrett 50 cal at 1,000 meters, right? It's not like this guy was there with a Remington 700, which was the M24 is an Army sniper rifle. It's basically a souped up Remington 700 with a floating barrel and some increased ballistics. But it's not like he was out there with a Leopold scope 700 meters away, hiding somewhere where it wasn't obvious. This guy was in a very, very obvious position. And that's why I have such a hard time with this.
And looking at the information that's coming out about, the range he was going to practice and things like that, I have no idea what the links are there. It's a little bit strange that he was dressed to sort of look like maybe he might be a conservative. And at some point in time, he had registered as a Republican and voted in one election. I feel like, I don't know, everybody's thinking Patsy. You know what I mean? Everyone's thinking this guy was groomed. And of course, they're going to try to make him look, he's going to want to blend into the crowd.
Well, I want to get into that in a second, because the next thing we're going to go over is who did it. The other thing I want to make sure that we bring it is the media coverage from this almost immediately was just absurd, like offensively so. There's an article here from the Daily Signal. If we can bring that up here real quick. And it talks about some of the more like egregious articles that were up there. So it said several liberal media outlets made the choice Saturday evening to display absolute degeneracy when covering the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. Now, not all of the left-wing leaning outlets did this. ABC News, CBS News, NBC News, and others reported correctly, along with center, independent, and right-leaning sources, that Trump was shot and Secret Service agents rushed him from the stage at a campaign rally. Yet CNN and others decided to go in a different direction. CNN initially wrote, Secret Service rushes Trump off stage after he falls at rally. There is no universe. There is no universe where that is honest reporting. None. And what's amazing to me is that it was only a matter of time before everyone was very aware of what actually happened, yet they chose to do that. The Washington Post wrote, Trump taken away after loud noises at rally. By the way, the Washington Post is one where their reporters have called me up before and asked for content. To the Washington Post, I will never speak to you again. Never. Why would I? Why would I, when it is so obvious that you've decided to make this, you consciously make decisions like this? There's no universe where that is honest reporting, and you know it. So there's another media outlet that I will never bother speaking to again. Very specifically, that Politico decided to kick it up a notch by writing photo of bloody Trump fist pumping. Wait a second. Photo of bloody Trump fist bumping immediately spotlighted by his allies. That comes from Politico. So once again, now we're like, again, Republicans shot, one murdered, Democrats hardest hit. Newsweek wrote an incredible headline, since deleted, reading MAGA responds with outrage after Donald Trump injured at Pennsylvania rally.
That's the most egregious of all of them.
Once again, Republicans shot, one murdered, Democrats hardest hit. Not to be outdone. There we go. What is it? Not to be outdone, Colorado State Rep Stephen Woodward, a Democrat, decided now was the right time to tweet, the last thing America needed was sympathy for the devil, but here we are. And there's other more posts as well, but I wanted to highlight those ones. The Washington Post, Politico.
We got more links. It wasn't just the corporate media. It was not just the Leviathan, right? It was, guess what? It was the managerial class. It was the Democratic base is what happened. And, actually, I have a tweet by Matt Walsh that I'd like to read off here because I think it's quite appropriate. It's actually a couple tweets. Walsh says, Dems are in a real conundrum. If Trump was really an evil supervillain dictator who wants to destroy our system of government or whatever, then assassinating him would be morally justified. But they don't want to justify this, which means they're confessing that everything they said about him for 10 years was nonsense. They either have to openly defend his assassination attempt or admit they're full of you-know-what. Yeah. There is no good option. They're screwed. And what's interesting is a political commentator that I enjoy his takes from time to time, Warren McIntyre, who works for The Blaze, retweeted him and said, if logical consistency were a critical aspect of politics, this would be true. Instead, politics is about friend and enemy, and the left knows Trump is the enemy. They wanted him dead, and they still do. How many times have we brought up that the left is not logically consistent because logically consistent doesn't get the job done, and the job is acquiring power. This is how you get circumstances where you have queers for Palestine. That's everybody's favorite example of this, of the inconsistency within the left. But there's inconsistencies all across the left. And a very prominent one is one that we just saw this past weekend, right? Where Democrats literally were going out there saying Trump is the reincarnation of Hitler and he's a fascist and he's going to destroy democracy and he's a dictator, yada, yada, yada. He's a racist, sexist, bigoted, every single terrible thing on the planet. And then it's, and I wish him a speedy recovery.
Yeah.
How many people wish Hitler a speedy recovery?
No, nobody, and it just goes to show that it's horribly disingenuous. There is a question here from Charles Hurst I want to get to because it's very relevant to what we're currently talking about. And he goes, "This may be an ignorant question, but were the security actual Secret Service, or was it some private security firm Trump hired out of pocket? Thanks for the map and the overview, Nick. It really helps." Charles, not an ignorant question. It was a combination of security teams, but they were government. So was Secret Service has primary control over the site. That's one of their responsibilities with covering presidential candidates. However, they work with local and state law enforcement whenever they're going to show up to do an event. And so there was local law enforcement. I don't know if there was state law enforcement there, but I know typically, like when I went to one at Trump rally here in Virginia, we had a combination of Secret Service, state police, and local law enforcement that were all present in order to provide security. And that's usually the best way to do it because your local law enforcement is going to have like the most information about the site itself. They generally know the people in the area, the owners and whatnot. So those relationships have usually been built. And so they usually play a role both in the planning and the security side. You have the Secret Service who are the primary experts with respect to obviously protecting someone like the president when they go to a site, and they have assets available for that as well. And then state police usually also play some sort of role as well in that. So that's what it was. That was on site. There's no question that the Secret Service were the ones actually controlling the site and responsible for the president's security. This also begs the question too on why they've been denying JFK Secret Service protection as well. Excuse me, RFK Secret Service protection as well. But no, not an ignorant question. A good question.
The other thing though to highlight is that his security is not as tight now as it was when he was president. So when we went to that rally, the security was insanely tight.
Yeah.
It's not as tight now, partly because this administration has relaxed they have not given as much Secret Service. Trump's team has requested more Secret Service multiple times. Multiple times they've been rebuffed by this new DEI head of Secret Service. Well,
the other thing, so
like they wanted this to happen.
From what I understand, Jill Biden was also doing an event in Pittsburgh around the day, and so they prioritized Jill's security detail. Again, here's what I'm going to say. Let's for the purposes of debate right now, I'm not going to assume they did anything bad. I'm going to assume that they had limited resources. I don't really buy that, but I'm assuming they had limited resources. I don't care how limited your resources are. Those rooftops have to be a priority. There's no universe when they're not a priority. If the Secret Service doesn't have the manpower to actually man them themselves, that's the first thing you go to local law enforcement and say, we need you guys to have people on top. We need to have you guys have people on top in order to secure that site, or at the very least be able to ensure that nobody can enter them or get up to the roofs on those. That's what you do. And nobody is going to convince me that they weren't able to have sufficient resources to do that. If they weren't, let me clarify this. If they weren't, why would you bless off on this? Right? It's not like the Secret Service said, hey, we don't have sufficient resources. Please, Mr. Trump, don't do it. They approved it. So again, that's where some of the problem comes in. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about right here before we move on to the shooter themselves and the potential motivation there, and the press just being wild over the fact that, oh, he's a registered Republican, because that must mean that you're actually a Republican.
Oh, we need to talk about that.
We're going to talk about that.
We all know what this potentially
it
can
actually
mean.
looked like strategic voting, which people will.
We're going to get into that. We're not going to get into it yet, because the next thing that we have to talk about right now that's really important is the person who did die. And that was Corey Day, and I apologize, I'm going to try to get his last name, Comparatore. He was 50, of Sarver, raised 2 daughters with his high school sweetheart while working as a project and tooling engineer. He had also spent a decade as an Army reservist and many years as a volunteer firefighter, where he also served for a time as chief, according to his obituary. It is, from what people say, the last thing Corey did before he died was throw himself on top of his family to protect them. And there's obviously going to be a lot of discussion about the assassination attempt, what it means for Trump, what it means for the campaign. I think all of us need to take a moment, and if you haven't, go over, read about Corey, and not just this moment. right? Read his obituary, read about his life, read about the things he cared about, the things that he dedicated himself to, his family, his friends, his community. Because from everything I can see, this guy was an absolute stand-up person that genuinely cared about his community and repeatedly put himself in harm's way for his community. And for him to die here, the biggest tragedy that took place on this day ultimately was not just the assassination attempt, it was an innocent man losing his life because he decided to show up to support his presidential candidate. And due to either incompetence and due primarily to somebody deciding to make an evil decision, he lost his life. And now you have two little girls that lost their dad. And that is truly tragic. And he's the one that deserves to be remembered, not the gunman. So I just wanted to bring that up. All right, let's talk a little bit about who did this. So again, I don't want to bring up, who his name. I just don't. We got some pictures here and whatnot, but again, any picture you put up have his name assigned to it. So we're not going to go into that, but I'm just going to read off about, who this individual was. So the gunman who attempted to assassinate, former President Donald Trump, go ahead and take that down. I don't want his name up there. Was identified as a 20-year-old from Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. He fired 5 to 7 shots, one which grazed Trump in the ear at an outdoor rally in Butler just outside Pittsburgh, according to law enforcement sources. Sources says he crawled onto the roof of a manufacturing plant more than 130 yards away from the stage at Butler Farm Show grounds. Again, he was killed shortly after firing those rounds. Everything that authorities recovered an AR-style semi-automatic assault. I hate it when they say assault rifle. It was a semi-automatic rifle from the scene. He was also wearing a shirt of a popular gun YouTube channel. I'm not going to mention that either on who it was because I know a little something about I'll tell you the name of the YouTube site. It's Demolition Ranch, and the guy who owns Demolition Ranch, it's a gun range. He goes out there and they do different demonstrations and things like that. He's pretty apolitical. It's like he does not make politics a part of his channel. He makes a lot of it about, shooting and responsible gun ownership and safety and everything else. So again, this is another one of those things where part of the suspicion of all this is you've got this 20-year-old kid with almost no social media presence. Right,
that's weird.
Which is
weird.
really strange.
To be 20 with
really
nothing
strange.
but a Discord account. He wasn't even active on the Discord account for 3 months prior. So radio silence from a 20-year-old?
Yeah, he's a 20-year-old. He apparently registered as a Republican in order to vote in a primary, which what's interesting about that is...
Yeah, we need to talk about this now.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is there has been a strategy, and it's been a big strategy they pushed in Pennsylvania as well, where they've told Democrats to go and register as Republicans or to vote in Republican primaries.
We know this all too well.
Yeah.
All three of us at this table, we all have, between the three of us, we probably have, 30 or 40 years worth of political experience, maybe even more than that. Two of you have run for office before. Yeah. And I've either worked on or donated or helped in some form or manner all of your campaigns. Yeah. And we all know that there are people who, when you go and knock on your door, we've all knocked on doors like this, where they say they're a Republican on the walk sheet, on our data that we have as Republican candidates or as Republican operatives, and we find out they're actually Democrats.
And not just any Democrat. Like, usually they're super
hardcore Democrats.
Aggressive Democrats.
And the reason why, and Tina especially can attest to this, is because Democrats love voting in Republican primaries in order to influence the outcome of that election. This is not a rare thing at all. And in Virginia, you don't need to register as a party because there is no party registration. So anybody can vote in any party nomination contest. The only restriction is they can't vote in 2 at the same time. But if there's no Democrat contest, we've repeatedly seen Democrats crossing over to vote in the Republican primary. This happened to Tina when she ran for state Senate, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
There were plenty of Democrats that voted in her primary.
I mean, to give you an idea of what they did, you had Democrat committees within the district actually posting or sending out emails to their followers. We know because we saw the posts and people would send us the emails of saying, "Hey, this is this Republican in the primary is the closest we'll ever get to a Democrat for this district. So please show up and vote in the Republican primary for so and so." And so this idea that the media is treating this like some sort of smoking gun, like this was some disillusioned, radicalized Republican that decided to take out Trump because he was really passionate about Nikki Haley, right? Like, it's just on its face absurd.
You know what else? Pennsylvania is a closed primary state. And so the only way that you can do tactical voting is if you join the Republican Party.
You have to register as the Republican. And that's his only vote, one vote.
Yeah.
This is a common thing. And by the way, it also happens in reverse. If you remember Operation Chaos from 2008, where there were Republicans that changed parties and joined the Democratic Party in order to vote in the Ohio primary for Hillary Clinton because she was losing at the time. And she ended up winning that primary in part because Republicans en masse voted in the Democratic primary. So I just want to point out that this is a very common tactic that political activists across the political spectrum do. Yeah. But if you're in a closed primary state, that does not mean that somebody that's registered as a Democrat or somebody that's registered as a Republican is actually a true believer in that party. If that was the case, West Virginia would have been a Democratic state until about a year or two ago.
Yeah.
It's been a Republican state for at least a decade now, if not longer.
No, there's been a huge push in Pennsylvania from both sides to register more voters and to be active there because nobody expected Pennsylvania to go for Trump the first time. And it did, and it's going to be one of the deciding states in this election, and it's trending Trump. And so this idea that simply because, first of all, what we heard about from some of the students and whatnot was some students say that he seemed like a nice and quiet guy. Other students said no, he was repeatedly bullied. Another student said it like he was one of the guys that wore his COVID mask like long after it was required and whatnot, which is always an indicator of a MAGA Republican.
Oh,
right?
Totally, right wingers, man, and those masks.
Yeah. So this whole problem is this idea that if you're gonna sit there with a straight face and tell me that simply because this kid registered as a Republican for the purposes of voting in a Republican primary, that means he was some sort of dedicated Republican, you're either completely ignorant of political strategy among the people that are actually very involved in this, or you know that and you don't care because it fits your narrative. And a lot of the people that are shouting the loudest about him being, he's a registered Republican, they're people that know better. They're people that know how this works. And they're repeating it simply because it fits their narrative. That's
he also donated to Act Blue.
Yeah.
How many Republicans donate to Act Blue?
Yeah, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. So look, the best information that we have about this guy right now based off of the actions and whatnot is that he probably strategically registered as a Republican for the purpose of influencing a Republican primary. But anything else we have is any other knowledge we have of them is either apolitical or it leans toward the idea that he was a leftist. So, again,
we don't know the full motive yet.
We don't know the full
what's
motive.
Funny though? And a lot of people are like, we don't know the full motive. It seems to me the motive was to kill the former president of the United States.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no.
Here's the thing: is they couldn't get their own presidential nominee to step aside and let somebody else, pass the torch on to the next person. So what's the next best thing, right?
The Democrats are still trying to replace Biden.
They all were lamenting.
Oh, we're going to get to that.
Yeah,
I've got a long list. We got receipts here.
Because we don't know. I mean, I think the motivation is pretty obvious that he wanted to kill Donald Trump, right? That's the obvious part here. Yeah. The other thing is it is incredibly suspicious that he has no social media activity unless this is something that he was planning for quite some time and didn't want it. I think choosing to wear certain clothing also could have potentially played into that narrative. I think the other thing that we have to take into consideration is the fact that the FBI now has his phone and can't seem to break into it.
Oh no, they broke into it. They got into it. They did.
Okay.
They got into it last night.
Okay.
But we haven't seen anything from it yet, which is interesting. We did also find out that both of his parents are registered therapists. Which tells you the state of mental health professionals in this day and age when there's two of them in the house and they raised a kid like this.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing that we need to talk about on the why, right? So obviously we're still waiting to see what specific information we can find out about what specifically motivated him. But to Christian's point, and this is where we're going to talk about, we've already talked about some of the press releases. What's interesting is Democrats for years now have been saying, they haven't been talking about Trump like the typical thing. We're all used to Democrats accusing Republicans of being mean or racist or divisive or whatnot. With Trump, the rhetoric has always been he's a traitor, he's a fascist, he's a Nazi, he's Hitler, he's a threat to democracy. His supporters are threats to democracy. Joe Biden got out there when he gave his little, first order speech with the red lights behind him, talking about MAGA extremists are a threat to democracy. And this has been the constant drumbeat over and over and over again. And look, I understand that rhetoric gets hyperbolic, during election season. I get that. What's frustrating to me is that the same people that are holding themselves up as the paragons of tolerance and acceptance and understanding and civility are the ones that have been doing this constant drumbeat over and over and over again. And they insist on doing it to a younger and younger audience. And then they're shocked when somebody actually resorts to violence. Not to mention the fact that, here's another thing I want to point out. I am so tired of hearing all these prominent voices on the left going, there is no place for political violence in our country. You weren't saying that at Trump's first inauguration. You weren't saying that when cities were burning all over this country in 2020. In fact, Kamala Harris, the sitting vice president at the time, candidate for vice president, was coming out and offered to bail rioters out of jail who are engaging in violent political activity. Right? That's what they were doing. They weren't saying this about Chaz and Chop. The mayor of Seattle came out and said this could be another summer of love until a couple people got murdered. And even then, they were hamstringing the police in Portland and Seattle from actually dealing with this. So I'm sorry. Do I believe that there are Democrats, that there are Democrat voters that don't believe in political violence? Sure. But I'm a little bit tired of I'm supposed to take it for granted that when all of a sudden a statement comes out from, prominent Democrats saying, this is not what we believe. This is not what we believe. It sure as hell was what you believed in 2020 when it suited. Right? When it was all racism is its own pandemic and it needs to be fought. And if people are burning down, maybe it's because you failed to listen to them. What did they say? What was in Baltimore? Like they need to get it out of their system. They keep coming up with moral justification for people to engage in riotous behavior, destructive behavior, violent behavior until it doesn't benefit them politically. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, this is totally unreasonable. This is nope. We need to stop this immediately. I'm sorry. I don't buy it anymore. You want me to believe that you believe that? Your rhetoric will reflect. Mm-hmm. But until then, I'm sorry. I don't buy it anymore. I don't want to see any joint statements saying, oh, we all condemn political violence. Do we? Do we all? I know I do. But do you condemn political violence? Really?
I think what they're not putting two and two together on is, okay, raise your hand if you're sad that Hitler died when he died.
Yeah.
Do you think people were being like, oh, thoughts and prayers, we wish for a speedy recovery? No, they absolutely hated Hitler and everyone celebrated when he died. Okay? You can't turn around and call somebody Hitler, literally Hitler, and you're all fascists and you're all Nazis over and over and over again for a decade almost and not be shocked. You can't be shocked when somebody goes, oh, yeah, well, Hitler was bad. It was good that he died. Put two and two together. Let's go ahead and rid the world of this scourge. You know what I mean? It's just terrible that they can do all of this and they don't recognize that their words actually do incite the violence. And then what do? They turn around and they're like, well, Trump brought this on himself.
Yeah.
And all of these MAGA people, all of these people on the right need to cool the violence, cool the temperature, you all. Cool, just bring it down. But I do want to say this. Look around you. Do you see anyone rioting? Do you see right-wing people going around and just randomly attacking people on the left? Do you see that right now? Do you? Because according to them, that's what we are. But you know what? Every time they have so much as a sniffle, they're beating people up in the streets and they're going and burning places down and throwing Molotov cocktails through windows. I'm sorry, but they're building up this straw man of us, which actually reflects themselves.
No, I don't disagree. In fact, let's go ahead and look at some of this, because for anybody that thinks that this just has been happening this election cycle or whatnot, let's go back to, I don't know, how about 2017? In 2017, Senator Marie Chappelle Nadal said, I hope Trump is assassinated. October 2017, Representative Maxine Waters, I will go and take Trump out tonight. January 2017, Madonna said, yes, I'm angry. Yes, I'm outraged. Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House. September 2018, Carol Cook said, where's John Wilkes Booth when you need him? So, June 2017, Johnny Depp said, when was the last time an actor assassinated a president? 2016, Robert De Niro, I'd like to punch him in the face. 2018, former Attorney General Eric Holder said, if they go low, we kick them. Danny Deutsch said, people need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator. 2018, Joe Biden said, if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him. In August 2020, Representative Ayanna Presley said there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives. In 2017, Senator Tim Kaine said, so the way we get outside the bubble is we take advantage of this tremendous public outcry against the administration. We've got to do this. What we've got to do is fight in Congress, fight in the courts, fight in the streets, fight online, fight at the ballot box. And now there's the momentum to be able to do this. That was Tim Kaine, Mr. Moderate. June 2018, the minority leader Nancy Pelosi said, I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country. And maybe there will be. 2018, Senator Cory Booker, that's my call to action here. Please just don't come here and then go home. Go to the Hill today. Please get up in the face of some Congress people. 2018, Representative Maxine Waters again. If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, at a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out there and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere. Right, this was all a while back, but that's not it. Let's look at some others. We got all kinds of videos of Democrats actually calling for violence between Maxine Waters, Representative Joaquin Castro, Senator John Tester, Senator Nancy Pelosi. We've got other Biden.
You mean Speaker Nancy Pelosi?
Sorry, Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Biden, days before this happened, on a call with donors, said we need to put a bullseye on Trump, he actually said it on a recorded call.
One, and here's one too, right? Once again, this is to make progress. We have to stop treating our opponents as our enemies, Biden said. They're not our enemies. They are Americans. It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again. It rang hollow then, given Biden's track record of smearing his opponents, and it rings hollow now from Biden as well. After his proving riddle tanked early into his term, Biden turned to attacking half the country in the harshest of terms. In 2022 in Philadelphia, backed by dark red lighting, Biden said the Republican Party was dominated by Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans who want to undermine democracy itself and take away people's rights. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. This has been the norm for Biden throughout his presidency. He referred to this MAGA threat and labeled Republicans extremists on multiple occasions. If you were to believe Biden's rhetoric over the last few years, you would think Trump and the Republican Party were an extremist cult that wants to establish a dictatorship and poses a threat to women and minorities. How can Biden then pretend he has any role in lowering the temperature of the country? This has been constant. This has been the constant drumbeat, calling for acts of violence, encouraging acts of violence, turning a blind eye when acts of violence took place. What's different now is that it's hurting them politically. And that always seems to be the difference.
Right.
If they actually feel that they're benefiting from it, they don't tell everyone to calm down when they're riding through the streets in 2020. They didn't. No. I'm sorry, I didn't see some huge push by all the Democrats to please lower the temperature. It was, this is what you get. You know, we tried to tell you with Colin Kaepernick, you made fun of him, now you'll listen. And as long as they felt, because the media had their back the entire way. The media completely had their back. Hollywood had their back. Academia had their back. And so they felt empowered to encourage that sort of violent, destructive, riotous behavior.
How many companies on Wall Street or in Silicon Valley were coming out in the summer of 2020 being like, we're going to give millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter. We're going to open up all these DEI positions. We're going to adopt all of these equity positions. Like, have you seen the graph that was like Silicon Valley pledged that it would, address systemic racism during the summer of 2020, and it responded, and it was like the graph showed that of like all the new hiring positions, it was like 97% of them went to diversity hires. And it was like 1% of them went to white Americans. And it was like, oh, okay. So these are all the examples of like how, and this is something that I've constantly brought up on the podcast, not just in live streams. It's not just the federal bureaucracy, although I think quite a lot of it emanates and begins in the federal bureaucracy. It is spread beyond the federal bureaucracy. It is seeped into academia. It is seeped into the media. It is seeped into the entertainment industry in Hollywood. It has seeped into finance. It has seeped into Wall Street, the stock market, corporate America, Silicon Valley. It's not just within the federal government. You now have other elements that are culturally shaping institutions that can change public opinion that are all pushing the same thing now. And you know what's incredible is these people call themselves the resistance. How can you call yourself the resistance when you hold the exact same opinions as the board of directors at Raytheon, the editorial board at the Wall Street, in the Washington Post, and the faculty at Berkeley?
Yeah.
And the staff writers at Disney. How on earth can you call yourself the resistance at this point? Every single element within society that shapes culture and pushes public opinion agrees with you on everything. You are not the resistance. You are the establishment. You're the elite. You're running the show. And you know what's incredible is that the left has not accepted the fact that they've completely taken over our country at this point and taken over every single institution. The revolution can never end.
Yeah.
Even when they've taken everything over. This is why you still see revolutionary rhetoric in like Venezuela, North Korea, China. Even when they run the show, there always has to be a perpetual revolution. And so how do you get examples of this? Well, they always have to come up with another victim class, right? They always have to come up with another struggle session. This is how you get circumstances where it's like things that the left didn't even know existed 20 years ago are now elevated to the heights of sacredness. And it's like, oh, well, we must protect trans kids now. And you know, the reason I bring this up is because guess what? There's a common theme here across how the Democratic base reacted to July 13th versus how Democratic politicians reacted to it. And, you know, there were some great people that decided to keep a running tally of this. Nate, could you pull this up? I want everybody to take a look at this because nobody has seen this yet other than me. Look at this. This is the Donald Trump wall of hate. Somebody collected just anonymous accounts, sometimes named individuals from across Twitter, all reacting to the shooting. No, they missed. How did they miss? I'm sad he didn't die. I'm praying for your downfall. It's staged. That was another thing that everybody brought up. How do you miss a fat man completely standing still? It just keeps going. Look at this. Look at this.
Yep.
Look at this.
Yep. Just keeps going and going and going and going.
And you know what's interesting? You know what so many of these things have in common is when you look at their bios and you look at their emojis that they put next to it, and they seem to always have the same flags next to it.
Yeah.
I wonder what country this flag is, because it's a very, very hate-filled country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the trans flag for you, by the way.
It's usually the trans flag or the Palestinian
flag or the watermelon emoji, which is a symbol for the Palestinian flag.
Well, I bring up this tweet here. It's the very end. It's the New Republic, Trump, Hitler. So the New Republic is.
I had a tweet about this because.
Yeah. Well, but bring this up. It's in the.
Nate,
just hit up the. It's the bottom link. Right
I just quote tweeted it myself.
Yeah.
Look at the screenshot of what they put on here.
Yeah.
We need to explain this for our audio listeners that are going to be tuning in after the live stream.
Yeah.
This is a picture that's modified to make it literally look like it's looking like the Trump is Hitler from the 1930s.
Yeah.
And it's from the New Republic, and the title of the article is "What American Fascism Would Look Like."
Yeah.
And then the headline is, "We at New Republic think we can spend this election year in one of two ways. We can spend it debating whether Trump meets the 9 or 17 points that define fascism, or we can spend it saying he's damn close enough and we'd better fight."
Yeah.
So many people had stuff to say about this. I said that the left and their water-carrying allies in the media have said for years that they want to kill fascists. They've also repeatedly said Trump is a fascist.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean, the implications are pretty obvious at that point.
They don't just reserve this for people who are at the tippy top of the political sphere either. They do this, they call every run-of-the-mill person who loosely follows right-wing politics these things. We see it in the Virginia General Assembly. Nick has been called a freaking Nazi more times than he can probably count.
Oh, I remember when Nick was accused of being a Nazi for opposing a gun confiscation bill.
Which the Nazis were all for gun confiscation.
And I wanted to be like, what? Who within the Democratic caucus in Richmond has opened up a history textbook?
Well, you know, here's also the interesting part. If you want to look at the voices that were the most supportive of Mussolini when he first took power in Italy, it wasn't the right, it was the left. It was the sort of people that wrote for the New Republic. They were the ones coming back saying, you know, and same thing with Stalin. It was leftists coming back going, I've seen the future and it works, right? So this idea that fascism or authoritarianism, these were all something that were, just plagues of the right wing in the United States. Go back and look at what people within the FDR administration were saying about Benito Mussolini. The guy that was first pegged to run essentially the New Deal programs and the Blue Eagle program and all of that, the National Recovery Act programs. Right? That guy was a former general who used to hand out tracts of the corporatist state, which was something that Mussolini's supporters wrote and put out. So this whole idea that Trump's a fascist. Wait, so let me get this straight. Trump's a fascist because he wants more economic freedom? Because he wants less government involvement? Like, that's antithetical to fascism.
Because he wants to, at this point, there's evidence that he wants to attack the administrative state and the managerial class. Fascism requires the managerial class in order to function.
Yes.
It requires the administrative state.
It is, if you want to distinguish, if you want to make one major distinction between fascism and communism, right? It's that fascism, and Mussolini said it himself, right? Everything within the state, nothing outside the state. Does that sound like a right-wing position? Does saying that everything within the government, nothing outside of the government, does that sound like something Trump would say, or does that sound like something a leftist would say?
The problem with all this, and at some point we will need to do a full-blown podcast on this, right? The problem is that the left and again, their water-carrying allies in the media are incapable of looking at history and looking at philosophy pre-1945 or pre-1933, right? Yeah. They're incapable of doing so. Somebody like Trump is a nationalist. He's not a fascist. Nationalism predates fascism by centuries.
Yeah.
But because World War II was such a profoundly world-changing event, we're incapable of looking at the political spectrum outside of anything beyond extreme right is mid-century Germans and extreme left is the Soviet Union or communist China, and the center is modern-day liberalism or leftism, right? That is not what the political spectrum is. And again, at some point we need to do like a proper podcast on this, because this myth will not die, and it's quite frankly, it's getting quite dangerous at this point, right? Because what's happened now is that, the left will tolerate an opposition that's incompetent, that doesn't actually push back. Mm-hmm. The left will tolerate an opposition that preserves that which the left was pushing for a generation ago.
Yeah.
They will tolerate the Mitt Romneys of the world. They will even tolerate the George Bushes of the world. But they will not tolerate anybody that tells them no. Yeah. They will not tolerate anybody that wants to swing the pendulum back to some semblance of normality. Those people are threats to democracy. And the reason why is because when they say our democracy, what they really mean is that it's theirs, it's not actually ours. Mm-hmm. They mean that they will be willing to accept 4 or even 8 years of nothing changing, but they will never accept anything ever being rolled back. Yeah. Right? They will never accept anything within the left-wing paradigm being pushed back. They will never accept any sort of conservative counter-revolution. Mm-hmm. They will accept status quo.
The biggest, that is why, and you saw this, we did this whole episode talking about what just happened in Europe, right? Because you started to see right-wing parties winning seats within the EU Parliament. And then what happened? Like the UK, you really saw it in France, where all of a sudden every party from center-right to communist, the Communist Party of France, aligned with one another to beat national reform. And it was this whole idea that the moment it is a threat to the status quo, they don't mind the uniparty, right? They don't mind the Mitt Romneys of the world. That doesn't pose any threat to what's actually going on right now. But when you look at the massive bureaucratic state, that is something that Trump sees as a genuine threat to the American experiment. And he's absolutely correct, because the bureaucratic state is not, first of all, it's not democratic. For the party that loves democracy, so claims to love democracy so much, the bureaucratic state is something that you should see as a threat to proper representation, proper representative government. And yet they love it, they expand it, they give it more power at every single opportunity. There is not a single time where Democrats are in charge where they don't increase the size and power and scope of the bureaucratic state. And unfortunately, so have Republicans. The last United States president to leave the federal government smaller than when he found it was Calvin Coolidge, right? But if we ever had a shot at a president that actually wants to decrease the size, scope, and power of the federal bureaucracy, it is Donald Trump, because he has seen, and very personally, the threat that it poses. And that is why they absolutely will stop at nothing to try to discredit him, or in some cases, some people will actually go the distance to try to murder him.
This is why they're using apocalyptic rhetoric on a scale that they, quite frankly, just never did with somebody like Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
Or somebody like Nikki Haley. And again, the reason why is because for so long, our party in some ways has been hijacked by people that are willing to lose. They're what Samuel T. Francis called the beautiful losers. They're people that are more obsessed with theory rather than they've completely rejected the Burkean view of conservatism, right? Burke actually warned about a dogmatic approach to ideology to the point that it makes you incapable of actually acting with any sort of rationality because you're so obsessed with the theory, you're so obsessed with the ideal that you can't see that what you're pushing is inherently self-destructive. And he used the analogy of the French Revolution, where it's like these ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity were so entrenched in the minds of the revolutionaries that it didn't matter how many heads they chopped off. It didn't matter how many people, innocent people, that they slaughtered. As long as it was in pursuit of these ideals, that's good. That's good enough for me. And Burke was warning, no, true conservatism is about that which works. Right? It's about moderation. And I don't mean moderation in the sense of capitulation. I mean moderation in the sense of not pushing extreme ideologies that end up hurting people. Right? In the modern era, an example of this would be socialism. Another example would be the managerial state. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people within the Republican Party that have rejected the Burkean analysis. And instead, they want to be the ideologues. But they don't even want to win as an ideologue. They're content with losing as long as they can pat themselves on the back and be like, well, at least I pushed the right policies. No, you are quite literally, yes, Francis was right. You are the beautiful losers. No, we need to win because the stakes are so monumentally high. They've told us how high the stakes are. Mm-hmm. And the only way that we can push back at this point is if we actually gut the administrative state, gut the managerial class, and the few elements of the bureaucracy that's left, we need to put our people in there so that way they can't stifle the presidency and the Congress whenever we have control. Have you noticed that whenever we have control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, there's almost nothing we can get done. But when they have control of the House, the presidency, and the Congress, the House, the Senate, and the presidency, there's almost nothing they can't do. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is because they have the bureaucracy on their side, whereas when we're in office, we're always fighting against the bureaucracy.
Yeah. No, it's true. And one of the things that we've noticed is that the problem with a heavily entrenched bureaucracy, again, most people have this impression that the president controls the executive branch, and it's reasonable to think that. The problem is that the amount of control they have over the executive branch is nowhere near as significant as you think it is because of civil service laws, which make it almost impossible to fire mid-level management, right? So the president he has a lot of appointments within the executive branch, but the executive branch is massive. And if you have a middle management that doesn't want to execute the president's strategy within his constitutional authority, they can slow roll it all day long. Right? You see this repeatedly where these agencies kind of have a will of their own, a mindset of their own, and they don't actually reflect what the president is trying to do, which arguably you would think that's what representative government is, right? We select a president. We expect the president to manage the executive branch in accordance with the policies that caused him to get elected. But if middle management decides, I don't like those policies, they can slow roll them, they can obstruct them, and it's almost impossible to fire them. And that's highly problematic.
You know, Matt Walsh actually brought up an interesting point shortly after the assassination that kind of ties in the events of the past weekend with what we were just talking about with the bureaucracy. Nate, if you could pull this up. Walsh says, the election is basically over now. Democrats will shift to shoring up their bureaucratic machine to undermine and sabotage Trump for the next 4 years. The game now is to prevent Trump from doing anything that can't be immediately reversed by a Dem administration in 2028. Yep. That gets back to the point that we're trying to make here, right? That again, they will accept 4 years of not pushing the revolution, right? They will never accept rolling back the revolution.
No. Well, and they'll never accept anything which is considered a threat to the apparatus, which keeps everything in place, which makes sure that you can't do anything of any significance that can't be immediately overturned by an incoming administration, right? So that bureaucracy is an incredible source of power for the left, because it is overwhelmingly run by the left. We had a question here from Murphy J. Said, Nick, do you agree that we should not be concerned about President Trump being an existential threat to democracy? Because as my civics teacher said, we're a republic. Here's the problem that we're in right now. We are a constitutional republic that operates off of democratic processes. Here's what I mean by that. Obviously, we get to, if you're 18 or older, U.S. citizen, you get to take part in electing your representatives at the local, state, and federal level. And then those representatives they also engage in democratic processes with respect to how legislation is passed. So it is absolutely true that we are a constitutional republic. I don't think you can then forget that we also use democratic processes, and that's important. We are not a democracy in the sense that Athens was. We're not a democracy in the sense that the simple will of the majority rules. And that's because as a people, we've actually decided to say that, no, there are certain things and there are certain processes that are important. There are certain rights that are so fundamental that they should not be subject to the whims of a majority. Now, again, the left insists on using this word democracy not only to describe our government, but really to describe what America is. And what I think is so problematic about that is that most people have bought into it. And so while it's perfectly fine for us to correct people and say, no, this is what we actually are, we're not just a democracy, I think it's important that we have to start winning the argument with respect to the use of language before you can just come out and say, well, I don't care if he's a threat to democracy because we're not a democracy. Because what that looks like to a lot of people that are just casual observers in all this is, what do you mean you don't like democracy? Aren't we a democracy? Isn't democracy good? And so you have to actually engage to some degree with the language that people understand. Now, you should do it in such a way as to move people to a proper understanding and to the use of the languages that should be understood and properly used. But until you get there, I think we need to take into account that your average high school student right now believes we just live in a democracy. And so it's important to, again, get them to properly understand the context and then also explain why, no, you don't want unfettered democracy. You don't want the simple majority dictating to everybody else what can happen. There's a reason why our founders had a problem with that understanding of democracy. And it's because you learn very quick that if it's just simply majority rule, then what ends up happening is that 50% plus one of the population can now essentially enslave 50% minus one of the population and can use them for whatever they want to enrich and better themselves. And so that's obviously not what we want. The other thing too that I think is so important about this, if we're being honest, is that what makes the United States and what I sometimes refer to as the American experiment so exceptional is not just our system of government. It was actually the fact that our founders tried to de-emphasize the role of government in the lives of free people. What was unique about it was not, hey, you're going to get to elect your representatives every 2, 4, and 6 years. What was unique about it is we're acknowledging that your rights first and foremost come from God. Right? They're not granted to you by government. You have unalienable rights, and then the government's responsibility is to protect those rights and then to stay within a very, very narrow field, especially on the federal level, a very, very narrow field of duties and responsibilities that it has in order to make sure that you're able to live your life and pursue happiness the way you want, provided you don't infringe on the rights of others. And that's one of the most important things that we need to do is we need to push back on this idea of like our democracy. It's like, no, our country is so much bigger than our system of government. It's one of the things that really makes me mad. I got in an argument with a reporter about this when she was talking about January 6th. I said, look, I said that anybody that went in on January 6th and attempted to use intimidation, violence, or engaged in vandalism or rioting, I oppose that. And they need to be prosecuted because that's not appropriate. There was a lot of other people that happened to be in DC on January 6th that didn't do any of those things. I said, but here's my problem. Where was the media's outcry about people destroying businesses all across the country, rioting, looting, taking it out, setting up autonomous zones? Where was your outcry in that? She goes, well, Nick, this was different. This was the capital. This was the symbol of our country. I'm like, that's the problem. That is the primary difference between us. You see, as the arch symbol of our country, a government building in Washington, D.C., and we see it in the hard work of everybody that tried to start a business, that tried to live their lives, that tried to live in peace. That is what we should see as America, every bit as much as the architecture in Washington, D.C. But if you don't see it that way, then I guess we can't be surprised when one thing happens, you think, well, that's just a protest that got out of hand, or a protest that needed to happen in the form of a riot. And then all of a sudden, once the government building, it's like, oh my gosh, this is the real threat to who we are. No, they both are. They both are. And until you can appreciate that they both are, I don't really believe that you truly understand what it is to be an American. Anyway, hope that answers that question.
Well, there are some other questions from people that want to know if you would consider running for president or vice president. Let's just deal with that now.
No.
Like, thank you. Never.
No, look, no. I will say this. There were some people that were asking me what I thought about J.D. Vance as a vice presidential candidate. One of the things that was interesting about J.D. Vance is he actually was against Donald Trump initially and said some pretty Like, I mean, it was not, it was, there was no confusion that J.D. Vance did not like Donald Trump initially. And J.D. Vance eventually got kind of won over, I think, by looking at judging Trump by policy and the things that he was trying to implement and the thing he was trying to do. And I don't think he necessarily agreed with Trump on everything, but I do think he came to the conclusion that Donald Trump actually understood the nature of the problem and was trying to fight the very problem. And so I appreciate that. The other thing that I appreciate about Trump picking J.D. Vance is all the people that are lining up to be angry about him picking J.D. Vance are all the people that I would want to be angry. And that's, again, I think that's an important part.
What's interesting is some of those people have gotten together and totally betrayed the party that they still pretend that they're members of. And they're attacking Vance for, quite frankly, I think some of the most based reasons possible. Yeah. Nate, pull this up. I have a clip that I want you guys to listen to here. This is great. Just listen to this. Understand, they're attacking him for this.
Mm-hmm.
Seize the institutions of the left and turn them against.
Oh, hang on. It's not loud enough. That's why.
I tend to think that we should seize the institutions of the left and turn them against the left, right? We need like a de-Bathification program, but like a de-wokeification program in the United States, right? So like, let me give you a couple examples. So one of the things I've always been very sympathetic to is this idea that we don't have a real constitutional republic anymore. What we have is an administrative state, right? The administrative state controls everything, right? So to the point that like when Donald Trump wins, he can't even sometimes get his people in core positions of authority in the administrative estate. It's like, well, do we have a constitutional republic? The founding fathers actually created a very powerful chief executive, a very powerful president. But if he can't even fire the people in his own administration, like, is this really a successful republic? So a lot of conservatives have said we should deconstruct the administrative state. We should basically eliminate the administrative state. And I'm sympathetic to that project. But another option is that we should just seize the administrative state for our own purposes. We should fire all of the people. I mean, I think Trump is going to run again in 2024. I think he'll probably win again in 2024. And he'll win by a margin such that he will be the president of the United States in January of 2025. I think that what Trump should do, like if I was giving him one piece of advice, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, replace them with our people. And when the courts, because you will get taken to court, and then when the courts stop you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. Because this is, I think, a constitutional level crisis.
Okay, I just want to point out he made the exact argument that I've made.
He did
at least twice on this podcast.
Yeah. Trump's Christian and I had this whole debate. By the way, sorry if we look at the AC is not working in the studio right now, and we are feeling it. But we've had this conversation before on again the problem with the bureaucracy. And Christian almost verbatim said that before J.D. Vance, and it was fire the mid-level management and then force them to actually take. I took the approach. I think there's a different way that you could do it where you could actually avoid court and you could still illustrate the problem with the bureaucratic state. But either way, that is where a major source of the problem is. There's no question about it. And that's one of the reasons why they don't like J.D. Vance is because J.D. Vance is actually calling out where the source of the problem is, and is willing to actually contend with it in a way that
he understands that the problem is not Joe Biden.
Yeah.
It is the Leviathan. It is the managerial class that they have.
Well, and can we point something out here real quick? All right. So Javier Milei in Argentina, right? Argentina has been under pretty much consistent leftist control for almost 70 years. And when I say leftist, we're talking about Peronists. We're talking about far left socialists. And when Javier Milei came in, he did not equivocate about what he was going to do. He was incredibly anti-socialist. He was Austrian school free market. And he went in there and on day 2 went from 22 government ministries to 9. Cut him out. He gave pink slips to 50,000 government employees. And his whole thing was, look, the vacation's over. Our economy, inflation is horrible. Our economy's tanking. You've made it impossible to build houses, to build businesses, to make money running a business. You've done all of this, and you're sitting here living off of the government teat, right? Which is really the taxpayers. He goes, I'm not going to let you do it anymore. So you're gone. And he had the power, he had the executive authority to be able to do that. Well, guess what's happened? Has the economy tanked? Is the economy of Argentina suffering now because 50,000 bureaucrats no longer are taking a job based off of taxpayers? Nope. Turns out they're not. Turns out the economy is turning around. Turns out things are starting to improve. Turns out inflation is getting under control. Why? Because this isn't mysticism, right? This isn't trickle down economics. It's none of those things. It's very simple. When you remove the various economic and regulatory barriers to people actually being able to live their lives, run their businesses, hire people, innovate, invest, they tend to do more of it. But when you add a whole bunch of new taxes, regulations, restrictions, compliance matrices, and all of a sudden someone's looking around going, I don't even know how to comply with the law anymore. I don't even know how to comply with it. And I'm terrified that if I say the wrong thing or I don't do the right campaign donation, the IRS targets me, not because of something I did deliberately, but because I made a mistake. And now my business is over. Now all of a sudden, and I've seen this before. I've actually showed up where business owners have said, Nick, I am trying to comply with the law. They won't tell me how to do it. The only thing that they'll tell me is that they think I'm violating it. And if I continue to operate, if I continue to build, if I continue to do what I'm doing, they will fine me up to $25,000 a day. So I can't get them to tell me what to do or how to comply. And one bureaucracy tells me to go to another bureaucracy, which tells me to go back to the last one, right? And Democrats thinks this helps. This is what protects the environment, or this is what supports workers, or this is what ensures that we have fairness and equity. No, it doesn't. It just shuts everything down. And then when people get tired and frustrated with it, what do they get told? Well, you're just mean, you're racist, you hate the environment, you're greedy, you don't want to pay your fair share, right? And that's what, again, that is so much of what the Trump administration represents. It is a rejection of that mindset, and it is the proper identification of where the true problem is. It's not just with the elected representatives that actually made that possible. It is with the bureaucracy itself, which can essentially operate with impunity and get away with it, to include subverting the will of the people through the legislature and the executive branch.
Yes, absolutely. And remember, unfortunately, it doesn't just stop with federal agencies. A lot of the ideology that's cultivated within the bureaucracy inevitably finds its way into the private sector. Mm-hmm. We've seen this over and over and over again. Yeah. How many times have people been targeted? We did a podcast that I think will be going out on Thursday. We've already recorded it. It would have gone out today, but there were things that happened this weekend. And you and I actually debated each other a little bit. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I brought up in that podcast were examples of conservatives, not just in the U.S., but around the world, being targeted, and not just by governments, right? I brought up that Nigel Farage had his bank account shut down. Like things like that happen because the managerial class have hijacked everything. Of course, they've hijacked the federal bureaucracy, but they've also hijacked every HR department in the country. Mm-hmm. They've certainly hijacked the universities. That was one of the first things they hijacked, because the universities largely are funded by taxpayers. Yeah. And so you have,
by the way, over about $1 trillion a year between state and federal dollars go directly to the universities, which are overwhelmingly left wing. And in fact, we saw it in Virginia this year. If you had any idea, but like Liberty University benefits from some of these government programs, that's absolutely true, except the Democrats have tried to shut it down. They've tried to prevent the universities they don't like from getting the funding and have it only go to the universities that they like and they feel like they have control over.
And so what happens is that when you hijack these institutions that create the elites in society, the people that pride themselves on their master's degrees or PhDs or whatever, and then they go into elite-coded fields of work, right? They go work in the tech sector, they work in the finance sector, they work in Wall Street or Silicon Valley or Hollywood. It should not be surprising when you end up waking up one day and you conclude, wow, how on earth did Cambridge, Massachusetts conquer the entire world? Well, the reason why is because they took over all of the few institutions that churn out the type of people that then take over the other type of institutions that then shape public opinion, that shape culture, and then in some cases that straight up shape policy.
Yeah.
They've taken all of them over. And all that we have are a bunch of massive people that are upset and angry, and they don't know what to do about it because they keep thinking, well, I just need to get the right guy elected and that will fix the problem. No, it won't fix the problem if that right guy gets into office and he finds out that he can't actually do anything. The only power that the president has right now is the power to grow the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
That's the only power that he has. and he cannot do anything unless the bureaucracy gives him sanction to do so. That is not the system the Founding Fathers came up with. The Founding Fathers came up with a system where Congress has power, where the presidency has power. They did not have this idea that you would have a third estate or a fourth branch of government that actually runs everything, and not just runs the government, but indirectly runs every element of culture in society.
Well, and keep in mind too, like this idea of having this managerial state was a progressive ideal. That's what it was.
This is a new thing in the American tradition.
And it really got going under Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was the president of Yale, and he actually thought the Constitution was a huge problem standing in the way of the government being able to do all the wonderful things that he wanted it to do. And he actually believed in this kind of technocratic state where you had wise, highly educated managers that would dictate the bureaucracy and determine how things would go. And that's what we really needed, was these managers. And so, again, this was not a right-wing ideal. It was not a right-wing ideal in the American tradition to say, yeah, what we need is a bunch of experts in charge of the government telling us how to live our lives. That was a progressive ideal. Guess who also believed in that? Fascists. It's what Mussolini believed in. You know, so again, it's this idea that we're being accused of the very things. And here's how they try to make the connection. They try to make the connection that, well, you guys believe in strong border security and you believe in a strong military. So did the Nazis. You must be Nazis. That's like saying, well, Hitler brushed his teeth. Do you brush your teeth? You know, it's a false equivalency, right? The reason why we believe in a strong military, the reason why we believe in strong borders is not because we don't want people coming into the country that don't look like me. The reason why we want it is because without a sovereign border, you don't have a sovereign country. And especially when you have a massive welfare state that, once again, was born out of the progressive era, the math doesn't math. If you continue to allow people to come in, which actually get the benefits of the welfare state without sufficiently putting in to those same things that make it possible, you're going to run it out. You're going to have problems. You're going to have bankruptcies. This is why Milton Friedman, who was a libertarian, who was all for immigration. I don't have a problem with legal immigration, but he said you can't have a massive welfare state and open borders at the same time. The math don't math. That's it. So you got to start asking yourself the question, why do they keep insisting on it? Not just in the United States. Why is it that every progressive political party, no matter where they are in the West, why do they keep insisting on this kind of open borders policy? Is it because they don't want to be fascist, or is it because they see it as an opportunity to get more people within a particular dependency level, which they can then depend on for voting? And again, you don't get to tell me that they don't want to move to a position where more and more people who are in the country illegally get to vote. We've seen it. I've seen it here in Virginia. I've listened to my Democrat colleagues say how they believe people who are in the country illegally should be able to sit on various boards at the local level, how they should be able to be police chiefs, right? And when we call it out, like, wait a second, you're telling me someone can be in the country illegally, but also be like the chief law enforcement officer with respect to a police department? You don't see any problem with that whatsoever? And what they end up calling it our undocumented neighbors.
Nick, it's not surprising because those same exact Democrats in Virginia want to put felons, former prison inmates, on the prison board, for just so that they'll have representation.
You know what's really fascinating is some of the people that used to make up the enlightened left, the reality-based community, the moderate progressives, the ones that are rational, right? They're not like the radical socialists and communists, right? They're willing to have a conversation and sit down and debate and talk about ideas. They've just gone full mask off over the last few days. Full mask off. A good example of this is Destiny.
Yeah. If you guys don't know who Destiny is, he's like a popular YouTuber. He's debated on a variety of channels. He became somewhat famous because he was seen as a logically and intellectually consistent progressive. He talked about how he used to be conservative, then he became liberal and progressive, but he would still attempt to use the laws of logic in his debate. He also became famous because he married a woman who constantly cheated on him, and he knew she was cheating on him, and he just thought that was a progressive relationship. Turns out that didn't work too well for him. But that was the thing. Him and Jordan Peterson did events together. He went on with other conservatives and did events together because he was seen as someone that would sit down and actually have a logical and civil discussion with one another.
Yeah, but just like what always happens is they suddenly reveal themselves. We've noticed that even in our very own chat, we have have various members who used to be pretty reasonable and be able to give us, a decent conversation, that now all they do is come in and troll.
The moment you don't give them what they want, that's it.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a couple examples that I've got to show people. Like, I mean, Destiny put this out the night of the shooting.
Yeah.
Right? If we learned anything today, I hope it's realizing the importance of principles I've stressed many times on stream before. Having a firearm means absolutely nothing if you don't spend time at the range practicing with it.
Yeah. That was Destiny's. That was the intellectually honest, reasonable progressives take.
But that's because they have dehumanized Donald Trump. They believe he's a villain. They believe he's a monster. They believe he's a Nazi. And everyone who follows or votes for him, we're all Nazis too. Mm-hmm. And all of us deserve death. Every single last one of them.
What's so fascinating?
It's just like during COVID when they were like, I hope you die.
Well,
they were
it's a new
hoping
current
we would
thing.
catch COVID and die.
It's a new current thing. There always has to be a new current thing. I brought this up earlier in this live stream, right? Like the way that the left holds power, because theoretically, bureaucracies should be neutral, right? Administrative states should be neutral. The managerial class should not be hardcore left-wing coded.
Yeah.
And yet it is. And the reason why it is because the way that the left maintains power is they always come up with another means to push the revolution. There's always another current thing. There's always another grievance that needs to be addressed. There's always another class of oppressed people that need to be liberated. And how do you liberate them? Well, you liberate them through force, right? You liberate them through government action. And so this is how the left has been able to weasel their way into the administrative state, something that should have been originally neutral. When Woodrow Wilson was setting this up, he was an idealist. Now, he was a progressive, right? But he was an idealist in the sense that he thought, oh, yeah, the experts need to run everything. We're going to get all my Princeton buddies, all my college professors, they're going to run everything, and they're going to do such a good job because they know what needs to be done. They're not going to be biased. They're just going to do the right thing. And what have we seen as a result of that mentality 100 years later is, no, they're not doing the right thing. In fact, they're hurting a lot of people. And the reason why is because they're not neutral. They're not the experts. In some ways, it's not a meritocracy. It's a kakistocracy. It's the rule by ideologically possessed people, whether or not they actually have the talent to be in that position.
Well, let's say this. Let's just say that, let's say in an ideal world, you could have a bunch of bureaucrats who were highly intelligent, who had access to all kinds of data. They had everything that they needed. And they were genuinely neutral. They were just there to carry out what the people's representatives had instructed them to do. Because that is what that function is supposed to be. It's to faithfully execute the laws of the United States. Okay. Here's the problem. And Thomas Sowell has probably done the best job out of anybody of kind of articulating why this is kind of an inherent problem within the system. Even if you have the smartest guy with tons of data, with supercomputers and access all of it, the problem is they still have less than 1% of all the consequential information necessary to make a decision that's going to impact hundreds of millions of Americans making choices on a day-to-day basis. And so that's why one of the things Sowell always talked about was you don't want a massive bureaucracy or a government that's constantly interfering in like market decisions or things of that nature. If you keep them focused on the things that they're supposed to do, protect people's individual liberty, protect people's property rights, establish equality before the law. If somebody hurts another person, we have a process that we all trust in order to adjudicate that. He goes, that's fine. A military in order to defend you from foreign invasion, that's fine. He goes, the moment you put the bureaucrats in charge of trying to make individualized decisions, doesn't matter how smart they are. Because hundreds of millions of Americans waking up every day making individual decisions within the marketplace, within their communities, based off of their individual needs, wants, and desires. What you need is a system which incentivizes them to make good decisions. Now, how do you do that? Well, it's supply and demand. It's also a question of ensuring that people get an accurate feedback loop for their decisions. So if I make a good decision and good things happen, I'm now incentivized to make more good decisions. If I make a bad decision and good things happen, I'm now incentivized to make more bad decisions. The problem is that one of the things that the bureaucracy does is that it attempts to save people from themselves. And what ends up happening is I make a series of bad decisions. I get rewarded for them. I make more bad decisions. You see this within aspects of the welfare state. You see this within essentially encouraging the breakdown of the family. And what Sowell, he goes, that's in the best case scenario. That's the best case scenario of people trying to do their best, the bureaucracy trying to do their best to execute the law in a neutral fashion, and it's still providing perverse incentives. He goes, but here's the reality. The reality is the bureaucracy has its own interests. And he learned this working for a government bureaucracy where he tried to get data back in order to determine whether or not what the government was doing was actually helping. And the people that obstructed him from getting access to that data was the bureaucracy he was working for, because it could have meant that bureaucracy losing power, scope, or funding.
Okay, so now
they didn't want the truth because the truth would have affected their power.
Right.
And so what this works back into is Thomas Sowell explaining that no matter how good the progressive state is, no matter how good the people you put in charge, even under the best case scenario, they will have far too much power and they will make bad decisions. But in the real life scenario, you're not dealing with the best of the best. You're not dealing with people with pure intentions. You're not dealing with people with perfect data. You're not dealing with people with perfect access to data. And so the end result is the bureaucracy ends up with its own incentive structures and its own priorities, which don't necessarily coincide with what even the intention of the legislation was.
So how do you tie what you were just talking about back to this assassination attempt? Are you saying bureaucracy was behind it?
No.
Or are we just completely off topic?
We're not completely off topic. We're talking about when it comes down to why do they see Donald Trump as such an existential threat to them? It's not because Donald Trump is a, quote, threat to democracy. It's not because Donald Trump is a fascist. It's not because Donald Trump is Hitler. It's none of those things. Donald Trump has identified more than any Republican presidential candidate in my lifetime what the primary source of the problem is, and it's a massive, unaccountable bureaucratic state. And that bureaucratic state, the left depends on the bureaucratic state more than any other apparatus of government to ensure that, as Christian likes to say, the Leviathan always swims left.
Okay.
That is the point.
Can we move on to the next thing in the outline?
Sure. All right. So the next thing we're talking about is what does this actually mean for the election?
Can I say one thing before
Yeah.
you go into all of that? Because this was not the only thing that happened this week. We had a bunch of other things happen as a domino effect with this. One of the things is that J.D. Vance was nominated as our VP pick. And I heard somebody say he's assassination insurance, but
I think he is.
I think they're not wrong. And because I think if there was anybody they hated a little even more than Donald Trump, it would probably be somebody like a J.D. Vance, who's 39 years old. He's the first millennial to show up on a presidential ticket.
Yeah. No, the reason why I didn't have a dog in the fight with respect to the vice presidential candidate. Typically what a president will do, what the top of the ticket will do with a vice presidential candidate is they will either try to appeal to a demographic or to a necessary swing state. And so for instance, Mike Pence was brought on to the Trump campaign to essentially convince more like traditional conservative Christians that, you know, hey, Trump wasn't going to abandon us on some of the issues that were really near and dear and important to
and
us.
Pence had a very long record of politics, right?
Yes.
He had been in the House. He was a governor. He was establishment. And I don't mean establishment in the sense that he was a squish. He was actually good on some policy, right?
Yeah.
But he was establishment in the sense that he was basically a career politician, right? He had a long record in politics. And Trump picked him for background and ideological balance.
Yeah,
but
he had to, because remember when Trump first came in, he did certainly well in the primaries, but there was a pretty bitter fight, and Trump does a scorched earth primary, you know, every single time. That's how he does it. There is no, hey, we're all on the same team. He goes after him.
Yeah.
And so he had to kind of reconcile with some of the groups within the Republican Party that he had, I think, alienated. I don't think that's the case now. I think everyone in the Republican Party is pretty much aligned behind Trump, except for maybe like the never Trump.
The holdouts, they're not even Republicans at this point.
So what is JD now? Again, some people said, why didn't you bring on Glenn Youngkin? Maybe that could have made him more competitive in Virginia. Or why didn't he bring in like Elise Stefanik, because then we would have had a woman on the ticket? Or why didn't he bring in Tim Scott or whatnot? I think the reason why he picked J.D. Vance is because I do believe that J.D. Vance is, I think he's articulate, I think he's intelligent, and I think he also understands that, I think he also understands that the bureaucratic state is the biggest problem. And he wants someone that's going to back his play on that, and to be an effective spokesperson for it. And I think JD can do that. And again, the thing that gives me the most peace about JD Vance is the fact that all the right people are pissed that he's the vice presidential pick. And that's where I'm at right now. Is I want people that understand the nature of the fight. I don't want people to just pass off litmus tests.
The people that could not preserve women's bathrooms, that could not conserve women's bathrooms, but cloak themselves in the label of being conservatives, are upset with the VP pick, which tells me everything I need to know, right? Because it's the losers out there.
The right people are mad.
Well, and here's what I think is interesting. I thought for sure, based off of kind of where the trend was going, that they were going to get rid of Biden. Now, I think the longer this goes on, the more it becomes very, very difficult for them to replace Biden. I think they might be stuck with him at this point. And like you said with the tweet we read off, I think Democrats might be reconciling themselves to the fact that they're going to lose in November. The question is can they hold on to Congress? And then how do they secure as much as possible the bureaucratic state in order to preserve all the gains they've made up to this point?
They're just going to try to wait him out again, like they did the first time.
I think they're going to. But what I really don't want Republicans to do is to come to the conclusion that, well, we've got this in the bag.
Yeah.
Don't ever assume that. Do not ever assume that. You're still going to have to get out there. You're going to have to, you have to vote. You have to donate. You have to show up.
Hillary assumed that.
Yeah. The moment you think it's in the bag, that's a real problem.
Speaking of other responses, we've got responses also from the semi-right. They're not really far right, like Elon Musk, for instance. He has pledged something like $45 million a month to a PAC to help get Donald Trump reelected. Yeah. What kind of an effect does that have? I'm not sure we've ever had a donor that's willing to do something like that.
We have some. We do. I mean, Republicans obviously have some big donors. We don't have as big a donors or as consistent as big donors. We've also had a bad.
We don't have like a George Soros machine like the left does.
And we don't have the. We typically don't have the sort of way that they raise money through Act Blue has been incredibly effective for them. We tried to match it through Win Red, and all it did was piss off.
Well, it's because Win Red sucks, and if you work for Win Red or you're behind Win Red in any way, you suck. We need something better, and I hate the way they do.
Here's the nature of the problem. The problem is that the current elite class in American society, and when I say elite class, I mean the ones that, are able to wield an outsized amount of influence and power because of status or money. They're all on the left, right? We've talked about it. This is the Leviathan, right? Wall Street is not in the bag for Trump. Silicon Valley is not in the bag for Trump. They're overwhelmingly on the left, on the left. And so it's no surprise that we're constantly getting outspent.
Well, keep in mind too, part of this is, it was funny. I was arguing with somebody once and they were like, the good corporations that are supporting these Democrat candidates. I said, they support the candidates that will allow them to write the regulations. Yep. And they will write the regulations in such a way as to prevent their competition or to get themselves subsidies. And that's the problem, right? Cronyism is not, first of all, cronyism is not capitalism, and it is not a conservative value. But it is very much a left-wing value.
It's not exclusive to the left, though.
No,
we
it isn't.
Constantly see these ridiculous things for public-private partnerships, and business wants this regulation. Business wants this regulation. What that means, translation, business lobbyists come and they want this regulation. Why? Because they want to bar entry into the market for all these smaller companies that are trying to break into the market. They see these threats. And they want to smash out the threat before it ever even hits their bottom line. Yeah. That's why business wants a lot of these things.
Yeah, it's important to understand that, again, what a Republican should support. I get into this. Are you pro business? I am free market. That's what I want. I want the people with the best ideas. I want the innovators. I want them out there hustling and doing their job. And guess what? When they do it well, and what doing it well should mean is providing the products and services that customers want. When they do that well, I want them to become fabulously wealthy. I want them to expand. I want them to hire more people. I want them to be great. But the moment a business decides that the way they're going to be successful is through government protection or subsidization, I'm sorry, you're not my friend anymore. You're not my friend anymore. You're opposition.
When those same businesses come to Republicans and appeal to the traditional business-friendly mindset of the GOP, which I think is starting to change in some ways for the better and in some ways potentially for the worse, but I think largely for the better. When those same businesses come to us, right, and they want X, Y, or Z, whatever that is, and they have an HR department that's infected with DEI wokeism, I'm sorry, but you can go to Coventry. Like, I mean, at some point, the right will wake up and realize we need to stop rewarding our enemies and punishing our friends.
Yeah.
Because the left punches right and panders left. And you know what? The right does the exact same thing.
It's like we think if we give more money and we give into their programs, they're going to like us more and realize we're not bad guys. See, we're not evil, mean, bigoted, racist, sexist, fascist. See, they're like, no, what you did is just finance them to be able to get a bigger bullhorn to say all those things at you. Okay, we got a couple questions here I want to get to. William Borchard said, question, isn't what J.D. Vance said about using the bureaucracy against the left, which is what Project 25 shows from my readings, just as bad and problematic as how it's currently implemented? No, and here's why I say that. And keep in mind, I'm someone that I don't want the authoritarian right. Right. I am still absolutely dedicated to what we would call like those founding principles of limited constitutional government. I don't want a right-wing government that's just punishing, our political enemies. That's not what I'm looking for. But the way that, like, when they talk about elements of Project 25, when they talk about what J.D. Vance is doing, what they are saying is like, look, right now, the way the system has worked is just how Christian describes it. And I've seen it firsthand from inside a state legislature. The left punches right and panders left. They reward them. They give them funding. They give them the rules and regulations they want, all of it. The right effectively ends up doing the same thing, just not to the same degree. And so what J.D. Vance and Trump and everyone else is talking about doing is, look, the bureaucracy was never supposed to be this its own isolated entity with its own agenda. That's not what it's supposed to be. And so when they're talking about staffing it with our people, they're saying we want the people that share those values, which essentially say this is not the proper role of government. And what that's going to end up meaning is it's going to end up meaning defunding a lot of institutions and organizations, which are essentially nothing more than left-wing ideologues. Now, keep in mind, the left is then going to come out and argue that you're against education. They're not going to come out and say, I can't believe you took all this money away from our DEI programs at Cal Berkeley. They're going to say you're against higher education. They're going to say you're against lowering tuition costs, because that's what they always say. And the bureaucracy backs up that narrative. So when they talk about letting the president staff it with his people, it's essentially saying that, yes, we're going to put it back into the proper posture, which is to say people elect a president. The president gets to manage the executive branch, and they're going to manage it in such a way as to essentially defund all of this money that shouldn't be going to left-wing ideologues, right? Can you imagine? It's not as if the Republicans are now saying, fine, you want to give money to Planned Parenthood? We're going to give money to the NRA. That's not what's going on here. We're just saying you don't get to give money to these organizations that prop you up politically and support your agenda. You don't get to use tax dollars to do that. And I absolutely want a bureaucracy which is dedicated to an administration which will carry that out. So is there always the risk of again, replacing this kind of left-wing bureaucracy and authoritarian with a right-wing authoritarian? Sure. And I don't want that. I would oppose any sort of right-wing authoritarian approach. I don't want a big right-wing government to impose its will on people either. But the only way we're going to get to where we need to be is if we actually have the right people within the bureaucracy who are actually dedicated to reducing the power, scope, and size of the bureaucracy. Got another question here. It says, legitimate question. Good, because we don't want any illegitimate questions. Let me see. I just lost it. All right.
Apologize, guys. It's got to be over 90 in this room.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We are kind of dying. And so we all have a little extra glow. Somebody said this is like hot ones, when they do the hot pepper challenges and they answer questions during that. That's basically what we're doing, except it's not peppers, it's just the room.
Yeah, I apologize. I was going to try to go to another question here. Okay, here we go. Question: how should we go about de-escalating the political rhetoric on both sides without relieving the responsibility of those that kept increasing the temperature for years, especially the media? I think that's a really good question. But here's what I'll tell you. Let me ask you something. We've had nonstop escalation of the political rhetoric from the left directed at the right, and I'm not saying it hasn't elevated on the right as well, but it's been nonstop from the left for over a decade now. You could argue even more than that, but especially since Trump really came onto the scene, it's just been hardcore and completely unhinged. They just tried to kill our presidential nominee. Do you see a bunch of Republicans rioting throughout the country? Do you see a bunch of Republicans trying to burn down cities or set up autonomous zones? Nope. Do you see any of that going on? No, because that's not how we operate. And now the left will immediately point out, what about January 6th? I will agree that there was a lot of horrible things that happened at January 6th. And that's also the difference. The vast majority of Republicans along the entire spectrum came all out and said that's not the appropriate way to do stuff, to include Donald Trump. If they hadn't shut him down on Twitter, he was coming right out and saying that. Protest peacefully. We're the party of law and order, right? But they blamed him because, well, your rhetoric before that is what energized this crowd to do it. Okay, fine. If that's the claim you want to make, then we get to make the same claim right here. The difference is that the preponderance of evidence for people then going out and turning political rhetoric into violent action is almost exclusively, not exclusively, but almost exclusively on the left. And so we don't have a huge problem with it. That's not to say there's no problem. But it is never been predominantly on us.
But they swear up and down that we're the ones who are dangerous. Yeah. We are dangerous. You know what? You know what this does is it kind of makes you go, you're going to say I'm dangerous? You're going to say we're all of this? Okay.
Oh, well.
Then be dangerous.
Tina and Nick already know I'm there at this point.
Well, and that's you know, and that's a big part of the issue, right? Like, I don't want Republicans out, you know, committing acts of violence.
Oh, I didn't mean
here's I don't want to committing acts of violence, and I certainly don't want anybody, harming innocent people. So here's the deal.
Nick, hang on.
I know you don't. Okay. I know you don't. I'm not claiming either of you do. I know you don't. What I'm saying is that our values still state that we're not permitted to go out and do, harm innocent people or harm innocent businesses or engage in destructive, rioting acts in order to get what we want. The thing that conservatives need to keep in mind right now is that the wind is at our back. We are in a good position right now.
Yeah, so don't screw it up.
Don't screw it up.
Like
January 6th screwed so many things up for us because there was a whole bunch of people looking at that election cycle going, there's a lot of shady things that happen. And as soon as January 6th took place, a lot of those people that were open to giving us an open, an audience said, oh no, screw that. If that's what this represents, I don't want anything to do with it. Don't do that. Okay, but by the same token, you should be using all this energy right now to, again, donate, get friends, register, vote. In a lot of places, voting in Virginia, voting doesn't start in November. Voting starts in September.
Mm-hmm. Yes, go vote early because you know what voting early does. If your state has early voting, please go and do it. And the reason why is because as soon as you go and do that, first of all, it takes you off of everybody's list because you've already voted, right? So you're not going to get all the stupid calls. You're not going to constantly get bombarded, right? But the other thing too is you secured your vote. That way no one can come in and pretend to be you and go vote. And so your vote's secure and you know that you've already voted. It's done. That way, God forbid, if something horrible happened and you were in the ER or something and you were prevented from getting there to vote on election day, at least you did it early. So it's done. So I just want to encourage everybody. I know that we're not super into the early voting thing, but I think that's a mistake because this is the playing field we're on. You need to go and take advantage of absolutely everything there is to take advantage of out there voting-wise.
Yeah. Connor asked a question, goes, Nick and Christian, what would some of the foreign policy implications be from a Trump and J.D. Vance administration with nations we ally with? I've told people this a lot because obviously there's a lot of things going on right now, and there's probably been more division than there's ever been in the country, and specifically on the right, on what do we owe to our allies. And increasingly it's been like nothing, right? Just focus on the United States. I don't believe it's totally an either or proposition. I definitely believe that the United States should, generally speaking, like our starting point should be non-interventionist. But there are allies that mean something to the United States, and there are strategic interests that the United States has that it makes sense for us to maintain those relationships. One of the best things about a Trump and Vance administration, in my opinion, is Trump understood something that U.S. presidents have not understood for some time now, and that is the United States. It is not the United States' job or the United States military's job to fight our enemies and then stay there for 20 years setting up parliamentary democracies. Like, that's not our responsibility. And people will always point back to World War II and say, oh, well, look how it succeeded with Germany and look how it succeeded with Japan. You cannot extrapolate what happened there to every other part of the world. You just can't do it. One of the reasons why we didn't get involved in a lot more of like massive conflicts, and one of the reasons why America's enemies we're a little bit more cautious with respect to what they did during the Trump administration is because they knew Trump was willing to use U.S. military power in such a way as to reduce threats, but not get the United States engaged in a decades-long conflict that ended up hurting us and costing us a lot in blood and treasure. It's what I call utilizing the military for punitive expeditions. So again, when Iran was behind the attack on the embassy in Iraq, did Trump decide we were going to invade Iran and stay there for 20 years? No, he killed the architect of the attack. That sends a really powerful message to some of these authoritarian regimes because it turns out they don't want to die, right? And instead of Trump saying we're going to bomb all of your citizens or we're going to make new generations of enemies by getting involved in a long-term war, he goes, no, I'm not going to target innocent people in that country. I'm going to target the people that were responsible for it, and I'm going after your leadership. This is why Putin invaded other countries under the Bush administration. He invaded other countries under the Obama administration, and he invaded other countries under the Biden administration. Which one did he skip over? Trump, in part because foreign enemies didn't know what Trump was willing to do. But they knew that he understood he had overwhelming technological and military superiority against any of our enemies, and he was willing to use it in the way that would make them pay the highest price while the United States would have to pay the lowest price possible. And that is why if you would have told me initially that Trump was going to be so great for foreign policy, I wanted to believe you. But I actually think it was one of the areas where he was phenomenal. I actually think it was one of the areas that he was best, is when it came to exercise the judicious use of U.S. military power without getting us involved in long-term long-term obligations. I mean, Christian, did you have anything you want to add?
No,
to that?
I totally agree. And Vance is in that same mindset. I mean, he's been attacked for it, right? Because he utterly opposes nation building and he utterly opposes foreign adventurism. But look, we're at this point now where the United States is there's two main exports coming out of the United States at the moment: dollars and wokeism.
Yeah.
Those are our two largest exports, and both of those are actually catastrophic for entirely different reasons. One is because we're entering the beginning stages of a sovereign debt crisis brought about by the fact that we are the world reserve currency, and we've leveraged that fact in order to monetize the debt, which results in this is another thing actually that Vance brings up. It eventually results in a hollowing out of the American industrial base. And so it hurts middle America, but it enriches the bureaucracy. It enriches those that have access to the money first. Right. And so it enriches Wall Street, Silicon Valley, especially the federal government and the Leviathan. That's the first problem. We're exporting dollars. We're not exporting anything else for that matter. But actually, in terms of ideas, though, we are exporting ideas. We are exporting wokeism. We are the number one exporter of wokeism of any country in the entire world. Yeah. It is emanating from our country. Mm-hmm. In some ways, and I don't mean this in a realpolitik sense. I mean this in a philosophical sense, right? So I don't mean this in the sense that we're invading, although we have in the past invaded countries. But like in some ways, we're a bad guy. We're not the bad guy because China and Russia are objectively bad guys. Like China is a Marxist regime.
We're spending hundreds of millions in tax dollars in order to make sure that Pakistan has
gender programs.
It's absurd.
We're spending $100 billion to queer the Donbass.
Yeah.
And so like we are a bad actor in a different sense, not in the sense that we are physically invading countries, but we are infecting countries with an ideology that's emanating out of the State Department, that's emanating out of the Leviathan. Obviously not just the State Department. It's coming from everywhere. And until we get control of that and we put an end to this destructive ideology, the United States, acting on the world stage to the degree that it has over the last few decades, is actually to the detriment of the world, not to the benefit of the world, because what we're doing is we are pushing a self-destructive ideology that quite frankly dissolves all of the necessary social and political bonds that maintains a society. And then we wonder why there's this like crisis of nihilism taking place in both the US, Canada, Europe. Well, it's because we are exporting this horrible, evil ideology.
Yeah. I want to get Itchy said something. He goes, if you don't live in a big city, then your vote matters. It's living in a big city where your vote doesn't matter. That is not true. Please let me explain why. I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, my gosh, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wins by 85% of the vote, what does your vote matter? I want to point something out, and this is something that Christian has pointed out. We've done entire episodes talking about things that have been going on in Korea, Argentina. There's trends that are starting to take place even within the major cities. But here's what you need to understand. When you're talking about races like the governor or you're talking about races like the presidency, your vote where you live matters no matter where to that race. It is incredibly important. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when she first came into office, I think won her seat by like over 80 points. The last time she won it, it was by just over 70. Now you're saying, well, what does it matter? So that's a 10-point drop, which means that's probably a 10 percentage point that went to the governor race. So please, please, please don't discourage people from voting no matter where it is, because even when you see these small transitions, that adds up to significant numbers at the state level. And so when you're talking about the Electoral College or when you're talking about statewide office, that's the difference.
Can I add one thing to this?
Yeah.
I do this for a living. It's one of my 2 jobs that I do for a living. I can tell you right now, I've looked at the numbers. I've looked at the registration numbers. There's people that I work with that Nick, you know, that are on the ground in Pennsylvania that are doing the type of work necessary to get Trump elected. And I can tell you, I've looked at the numbers. Trump is going to win Pennsylvania because of Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. We're not going to win a single congressional or legislative race. We might win some in the most northern parts of Philadelphia, which is white collar, blue collar, white working class. And that's trending red. And we actually might win some races up there. But in 90% of Philadelphia, we're not going to win any congressional races. We're not going to win any state Senate races. We're not going to win any state House races. We're going to lose all of those. But there's a difference between losing a precinct in Philadelphia by 70 points and losing a precinct by 50 points.
Yeah.
And Trump is going to win the White House because Pennsylvania is going to determine this entire election. Yeah. Trump is going to win the White House because he is going to eat into the Democratic margin in Pennsylvania on a scale that we haven't seen since probably before the 1950s.
Which is why he's visiting deep blue areas just to try to move the needle a little bit. And he wouldn't be visiting those deep blue areas, those big city areas, if he didn't think and his analysts didn't think there was some value in that.
Yeah.
So can I circle back to something real quick about the shooter? Because a few people have brought up in the chat, and we completely forgot to bring it up, is that the shooter was featured just briefly in a BlackRock commercial, and there's some theories swirling around. Just the fact that he has so many little connections with organizations which all of us feel are really bad. We do start to kind of wonder, like, where were these relationships forged? Was there help somewhere inside? You know, did someone groom him up, like, and bring him up? And so that whole BlackRock commercial thing, I wanted to bring that up. And then I also saw something else. We have people congratulating us on 1 million subs. Yes. Yesterday we saw it turn over to 1 million, and we were super excited.
No, yeah. Thank you very much for that. That's kind of it was a big milestone for us, and we're both shocked and very grateful. So thank you. I think when it comes to, like, look, I think BlackRock is a horrible organization, especially with some of the things they push, and specifically the reason and the way they push it. I'm just not prepared at this point to say that had some impact on how this went down.
But the connections are weird.
The connections are, sure. The connections are weird.
But they could just be coincidences.
I don't know. Like, again, I'm waiting for more stuff to come out. If there's one thing I don't want to do on this channel, I know that sometimes, like, I get passionate about what we talk about, but when it comes to, like, explaining things, like from a when it comes to explaining things from, like, a conspiratorial side, I try to make sure that I have enough evidence to be able to justify whatever my assumptions are, or whatever my speculation is. And I don't have enough evidence on that to give you an effective speculation. And so that's why I'll refrain from doing so. So again, I know that's not as satisfying. Sometimes people are like, but what if? I'm like, it's possible.
I think it's a red herring and a distraction, to be honest.
It can be, and you're always going to see distractions, but you still have to kind of address, okay, it's
weird.
There is something. It is weird. It's odd. But it might just be nothing.
Yeah. Abe says, I live in a blue state, New Jersey. I've never voted because I'm under the impression my vote won't matter. Am I wrong? Yes, Abe, you're wrong.
You're wrong.
And you're wrong for a couple of reasons. And again, I appreciate you asking the question so honestly. One, you never know how your vote can impact things on a local level. You never know how your vote can impact on things like special elections, because you never know how your vote can impact on things like primaries, because a lot of things, a lot of people live in states where they feel like, there's just such a dominant view that it doesn't really matter. If you ever want to help change that, well, then you've got to be more active. You got to participate. And then, like I said before, it really impacts. There's two areas where I can see a vote impacting more than you might think. One is on local elections that are sometimes not done at the same time as all the other elections are done, and getting people onto things like your local school board or your sheriff or your local board of supervisors. That ends up providing the bench whereby other candidates can break into an environment that might have been more difficult. If you want to look at how Democrats took over states like Colorado, one of the things that they talked about was making sure that all of their voters got out and voted and were very active, and then got involved in the local races. They didn't care if it was soil and water conservation board, right? They didn't care. Just get people into those positions where they could have some authority, they could have some exposure to the public, they could run a successful campaign, and then they'd run them for board of supervisors, or they'd run them for, whatever, school board. And then at that point, they became logical candidates for your state house. And the next thing you know, they're taking over an entire state. So no, it can be done. The problem is that a lot of times as conservatives, the government is our primary focus, nor should it be, right? And so if we don't get results back as fast as we would want, we tend to disengage. And that just can't happen. All I can say is that the left is absolutely counting on you not engaging. And so please, regardless of where you live, get out there and vote. I will never tell you that politics should dominate your life. By all means, focus on your family and stuff like that. But my gosh, don't pass up the opportunity to have a say when you can and to be active where you can.
We had somebody mention not to forget their super chat earlier in the chat, and we're trying to keep up with the super chats. So if we could scroll back through and make sure.
Yeah. Thank you very much to Whitfield, and congratulations for the subs and the super chat. It is very much appreciated.
Yeah.
Yeah. James, same thing. Because Nick, you represent my values much more than my Sacramento legislators. I appreciate that. I'm actually again, don't tell anybody. I'm originally from California. I was born and raised in Chico, California, and I know how frustrating it can be. I'm also old enough to remember when California could elect a Republican governor and could have decent representation within the state house. And I'm also someone that believes that after a while, things have a tendency to correct. And it's usually when people start associating the bad policies with the people that put those policies in play. But that also requires somebody to provide a contrast. And that's one of the biggest problems that Republicans have done in purple states or even in blue states, is they think that the way they're going to win is by being Democrat light, when in reality, the way that they're going to win is by actually providing a genuine choice and contrast. And my hope is that California is going to get back to that, because California is an absolutely gorgeous place. It really is. And it's a shame to kind of see what's happened to it. But yeah, so we're going to. Baptist 72 said, I would love to see you have Vivek on the podcast after all of this craziness. If we would too. I'd love to have a conversation with him. I don't agree with Vivek on everything, but I do think he's an incredibly articulate spokesperson. I'd like to. My concern with Vivek has always been to try to figure out, okay, where does he genuinely stand on everything? Because obviously there has been some concerns, but look, I had those concerns about Trump, and Trump proved himself over time. I think I want to give Vivek a chance to prove himself over time. Another person people have asked us to have on is Tulsi Gabbard. I've met Tulsi. I've spoken with Tulsi before. Again, Tulsi and I don't agree on every position, but I like to give opportunities to people that I think have come from one side and have seen the light, if you will. I like to give them an opportunity. I don't want to put them in charge right away, but I want to give them an opportunity to explain, their process and their political transition, if you will. And I think it's always interesting to talk to those people that used to think very differently at one point and have since changed their minds, and just ask them the source of that. So we're always willing to give an opportunity to do things like that. Lady Liberty said he said in his speech at the rally calmly and peacefully. He also asked for National Guard for July, and Pelosi denied it. That's true. This is one of the things that, again, it was interesting when Democrats completely controlled the hearings on January 6th. All you heard was Democrat talking points on January 6th. The moment more evidence started to come out about what Trump requested, what he asked for, the things that he said on that day, not to mention the things that he requested leading up to that day, all of a sudden you realize that all we had been fed was the Democratic talking points on January 6th. And there were some people that got caught up and that got held with, I mean, we're supposed to be guaranteed a speedy trial. And that did not happen for a lot of the people that got caught up in January 6th, to include some people that, quite frankly, I don't think we're doing anything wrong. And so, yeah, no, it's important. I think we've gotten all the super chats that we missed. I apologize if we've.
We just got another
There we
one.
go.
Another
Congrats for the
congrats.
sub streamers. Oh, wait, let me see here. I'm trying to.
Lance.
Wait 1 second.
Where was it?
There we go. All right. Congrats for the sub streamers. And hey, as a Gen Z, rightly getting me a Bible to study what's inside. Apparently they're free. Just need to line it up with getting off work and daily life with my local parish. No, that's great. Again, we've done a lot of. We did an episode a while back on, is Christianity reasonable? And one of the things that we talked about on that, and just talking about, like, hey, look, from a logical standpoint, looking at the laws of logic, looking at reason, looking at rationality and empiricism, does this make sense to believe in? And I think we did a pretty good job on that episode. But yeah, thank you very much for the super chat.
There's another one. Joe said, "Don't forget my super chat. Want to know if you would run for president?" I think we already addressed that and said no, but I think
Here's what I'll tell you. Look, when it comes to, I always consider it a compliment when somebody says, "Hey, I think you'd be a great president or vice president." I appreciate it. There's a lot to that. Like, I've run for Congress before. That was brutal. That was a brutal race. It was really tough. Look, I think that I think there's a lot of people that would do a very, very good job that are in a much better position than me to run for an office like that, and I will be more than happy to support them. Tina and I have especially been feeling lately that the area where we feel the most called to engage in kind of this fight for what we love and what we believe in is really in the cultural realm. It's doing stuff like this. It's having these discussions. And we'd like to do more of that. We'd like to focus more of our effort on that. It doesn't mean that I'm still not going to do what I'm doing in the state legislature for right now. But that's something that we think about, something that we pray about. And look, I've been in the legislature. Next year will be my 10th year. I don't think politics is supposed to be a lifelong career. And so we'll see what happens as things go on. I mean, I still think there's a lot of good work to be done over there, but, yeah, again, there's a lot of ways to fight for the things that you believe in. It doesn't all have to be an elected office, but I'm always, I always appreciate when people.
I have Lance. Oh gosh, I can't say the last name. Canamizel, or I just completely
Apologize for our pronunciation.
destroyed your name, and I'm really sorry. I finally found his super chat. It says, on civil unrest and future attempts on Trump, what do you all think is next? Civil conflicts? What will be the left's reaction if he wins in November? I was actually saying, we were probably 2 centimeters away from headed to a civil war, actually, on Saturday, because if they had been successful in assassinating Trump, I think that's when you would have seen the more violent side of the right, which it takes a lot to get us there, obviously. But I do think that's where we would have been headed had they been successful. And on top of that, with civil conflicts, the left's reaction, they're just going to completely melt down again. I really believe when he wins, because I really believe he's going to win. I think you're going to see more violence from the left. Typically, the right does not resort to violence. The only people that
the right doesn't?
The right does not usually resort to violence. Sorry, I mixed up my words. Yeah. Usually, if we have anybody violent on our side, there's some of the crazies. A lot more crazies live on the left. We already saw that with the mental illness stats. A lot more female leftists are mentally ill. I mean, it's extremely obvious. Like, the data shows it by a huge margin. And so mental illness really does mostly reside on the left. It doesn't mean that we don't have some on our side too, but I do think that that's one of the reasons why you see them go toward the violent side a lot more often than we do, is because I do feel like leftism is a mind virus. So there you go.
No, I do. I can't see a Trump victory that doesn't result in some sort of left-wing civil unrest. I don't know that
a Trump victory will massively accelerate the path that we're currently on. Is what will happen.
I don't. Well, see. Okay, but here's what I'll say: is that
I mean that as a good thing.
I don't want to give the. I don't. I think the left has a real hard time accepting election decisions they don't like. I think especially with Trump, like, there was no rioting in the streets when Governor Youngkin won in Virginia, right? But I think there's such an animosity toward Trump, and so much of the rhetoric has been based off this idea that he's a threat to democracy and a fascist and literally Hitler, that it's going to be hard to not see situations where the left openly engages in riot and violent activity as a response to it. So, I just don't know. Thalos, thank you for the super chat, said, would you consider a cabinet position like SecDef? I don't think I'm in the running for any sort of like cabinet or undersecretary positions or whatnot. I would say that if that did come up, obviously if the president asks you to serve in the administration, that's something that you consider, right? You don't just out of hand say absolutely not under no conditions. I would consider that. I would want it to be something where I felt like I could do the most good based off of my experience and where I think kind of the biggest problems are. But again, I don't think I know people that are being considered for positions, and there's some great people. Andrew says, take a break and drink some water. Dude, it is so hot in here. I can't even tell you right now.
What's the temp, Nate? What's the temp?
99. Keep
99
going. Keep
degrees.
going. I want to hit 100.
It's so hot in here, and it's super humid. I am melting.
Yeah. I'm the one wearing a flannel and a hat.
Yeah.
Yeah, why are you wearing a flannel and a hat? Well, Christian's always cold.
I'm always wearing a flannel.
Yeah.
Like Christian's happy. This is his happy environment.
No, this is
Are
too
you
hot
sure
for
you're not
me.
lizard people?
I am not lizard people.
Yeah.
Here's another one I don't think we've read off from Whitfield. Would you have Thomas Massey on MTA?
Oh my
Absolute-
gosh,
I
yes.
wish.
In a
I wish.
heartbeat. We do need to reach out to Tom again.
I just
Do you
want to let
think he would
everybody
come
know.
on? Do you think he'd come on here?
Oh yeah, Thomas. So like I actually
We love
know,
Thomas Massey.
Yeah, I know,
Yes.
I know Thomas. Like there's some people that you kind of know from a distance, but like I actually know him. I mean, it would be a little much to say, oh yeah, we're best buddies or stuff like that. But like Thomas and I have had like long conversations before and whatnot. I've always been a big fan and admirer. His wife just recently passed away. And so that's been really, really hard on their family, obviously. But I think Thomas has been one of the best members of Congress.
Thomas
hands down.
is the, or one of, if not the best members in the House of Representatives, maybe in the entire Congress. So
Yeah.
there's probably nobody that more closely ideologically fits my mold.
Yeah.
Currently serving in DC right now than Thomas Massey. I'd
Yeah.
love to see you interview him.
Oh no, it's again, we've actually shared the stage a lot. We've been on, there was a group, Young Americans for Liberty, where for a while there we both got invited to a lot of their thing. I think Thomas still does, but he's the thing I love the most about that guy is I feel like he is willing to speak the truth and stand up to everybody to include his own side when necessary, and I really appreciate that about him. Always have. I think we're gonna I think kind of roll this up.
Please,
So let's
we're dying.
before we hit 100 degrees.
We
All right.
love you guys, but we're dying.
It's getting warm. Yeah. So here's how I want to wrap this up. Right. Look. Obviously, the attack on President Trump was hellacious, and the left's response to it has been fairly horrible. On kind of the Twitterverse, and the media's response, the media's initial reaction to it was also horrible. I'm sorry, I'm not ready to sit here and be like, oh yeah, let's do a bunch of joint statements and stuff like that, because I feel the same people that ramped up the rhetoric, that use this constant drumbeat of he's a fascist, he's a threat to democracy. I think they need to understand that they have set certain conditions where they have turned their political opponent into an existential threat against the nation. And I'm sorry, you don't get to do that repeatedly and then act like you had nothing to do with it, especially if you're the same sort of people that are constantly blaming any bad thing that happens on our rhetoric. So that's the part where I'm like, I'm sorry, I'll believe it when I see some changes with respect to how people talk. Joe Biden doesn't get to get up there and say we need to lower the temperature and then immediately go out and make speeches about how we're all threats to democracy and extremists. He doesn't get to do that. He doesn't get to do those two things. I will say this. I think if the election were held today, Trump wins, and I think he wins handily. But the election isn't today. The election's in November. And so if you've decided that, yep, we've won, we've got it, the winds at our back and we're going to win, I'm sorry. You are planning to fail at that point. We need to be diligent all the way through. We need to be active all the way through. We need to be supportive all the way through. We need to be donating. We need to be getting people out to vote. I don't want Trump to just win in November. I want him to win overwhelmingly with such a mandate that he can actually carry across some of these congressional seats, that he can actually get a majority in the House and in the Senate, because ultimately that's what he needs. There's a lot he can do as president with the executive branch, but if he doesn't have a House and a Senate that's willing to work with him, that's willing to change some of the laws that need to be changed, the bureaucracy is going to slow roll us once again. So don't just look at this with respect to the presidency. If you're one of those people that says, well, we elected Trump, why didn't he fix it? But you didn't do everything you could to give him a Congress that will actually work with him, then we haven't given him enough to succeed. And I have to tell you, one of the biggest things that's so frustrating for me is when I will hear people say, Nick, why haven't you fixed these problems? I have been in the state legislature in Virginia for 9 years. I have never had a government in Virginia where we had the House, the Senate, and the governor. Not once. So where do you want my bills to die? Do you want them to die in the House? Do you want them to die in the Senate? Or do you want them to die on the governor's desk? Because I've had them die in all three places. We can't let that happen to Trump. You have to give him the presidency, the House, and the Senate so we can actually get the legislation to his desk and have him sign it, because that's what it's going to take to actually make the sort of changes that we want to actually confront this unelected bureaucracy, which has way too much power in the United States. So I would say remain very, very focused on that going forward, because that is what ultimately is going to put us in the position to be able to make the changes that we need to see made. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Once again, having 1 million subscribers, crossing over that 1 million mark was a huge milestone for us. We really appreciate it. We want to continue to make sure that we are actually posting the sort of content that you would like to see. We want to make sure that the analysis that we provide is not just, again, obviously we come from an ideological side of this. But we always want to make sure, too, that we're following it through a logically consistent, following the laws of logic, empiricism, that we're giving you good arguments to make, and that you feel confident that the data, the information, the arguments that you're hearing here are ones that you wouldn't mind making to a group of friends, to a diverse group of people. And hopefully we're continuing to do that. As you give us more of your feedback, we'll get even better at it. Also, consider going over to Circle, joining over in Circle. And then the last thing I'm going to make, too, is that we have various people that advertise through us. If you want a way to support the channel that comes like directly to us and also support some good companies, when we do those ads for those people, I know sometimes people skip through them or they don't want to listen to them. Consider going over there and checking them out. They're going to give you some good deals, and it's a great way to support our program as well. So once again, thank you all very much. God bless, and we'll see you next episode.